The sky over Folsom State Prison that day was gray and dreary, as if nature itself wanted to drown any hope for the souls trapped behind those thick concrete walls. The harsh sound of the roll call whistle pierced the air, mingling with the clanging of heavy metal doors. Marcus Ghost Jackson stood silently among the crowd of inmates, his dark brown eyes scanning the unfamiliar faces in the vast prison yard. He was 6'2", with a solid build that wasn't overly imposing, and his broad shoulders carried an air calm that was hard to decipher. Here, in this notoriously brutal California prison, he was just a number inmate 47291. No one knew who he once was. No one cared. Marcus remained silent as the guard called out each name. When Jackson echoed through the air, he simply nodded slightly, saying nothing more. The crowd around him whispered, their curious eyes sneaking glances in his direction. A tall, lanky guy with a snake tattoo on his neck leaned over to his buddy and muttered, "This new guy looks like a total weakling. He probably won't make it through the first week." Marcus heard him, but he didn't react. He was used to being misjudged. In the military, they called him Ghost not because he was invisible, but because he always showed up when the enemy least expected it, and vanished before they even realized they had lost. Folsom Prison isn't a battlefield in the desert of Iraq or the dark alleys of Syria, where he once led a team of Green Berets on missions that even his superiors wouldn't dare mention in official reports. But it's just as much a dead zone. The air is thick with the stench of sweat, despair, and a hint of the violence that lurks around every corner. Marcus walked toward the cell block, his worn prison shoes scraping against the concrete floor. He was led to cell number 17, Block C, a tiny room, barely 10 square feet, with walls marred by scratches and an old, rusty bed. He sat down on the thin mattress, feeling each rusty spring digging into his back to the torn fabric. Outside, the screams of the prisoners echoed back, mixed with the hoarse laughter of some guy telling filthy stories. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to block out the flood of memories. He remembered the last night in Baghdad when his team was ambushed in a narrow alley. Bullets whizzed overhead, smoke filled the air, and the cries of injured comrades pierced the night. He had pulled Daniel Hayes, a fresh-out-of-training soldier, from the rubble, despite his own left arm bleeding from a deep shrapnel wound. They survived, but the price was a never-ending nightmare. Now he's here, stripped of all honor of freedom, and even the name that once made his enemies tremble. Marcus opens his eyes, peering through the iron bars. A scrawny inmate walks by, holding a half-smoked cigarette, the smoke curling in the damp air. The guy glances at him, his eyes filled with scrutiny. Marcus knows that look is the gaze of someone searching for weakness. He's not afraid, but he's not naive either. Folsom isn't a place for the faint-hearted. He's heard about the gangs inside, especially the Razor Claws, the notorious thugs with homemade knives as sharp as razor blades, ready to slit the throat of anyone who dares to cross their path. The dinner bell rang, pulling Marcus out his thoughts. He stood up, adjusted his light gray uniform, and stepped outside. The cafeteria was a long, wide room, about 50 feet long, filled with metal tables covered in scratches. The smell of overcooked mashed potatoes and cheap canned meat hit his nose. Marcus got in line, received a food tray from a scarred chef, and picked an empty corner table to sit at. He didn't want to draw attention, but the eyes of the Razor Claws were glued to him like flies to honey. The leader, a big guy with tightly braided hair and a red claw tattoo on his neck, stood about 10 feet away from him. His name was Tyrone Razor Evans, the self-proclaimed king of Block C. Tyrone smirked as he stepped closer, his crew silently trailing behind him like hunting dogs. "You're the new guy, right?" Tyrone said, his voice deep but laced with challenge. Marcus looked up, his gaze calm. "Yeah, so what?" he replied, his tone even, showing no fear. Tyrone let out a loud laugh, the sound echoing to the mess hall, catching the attention of other inmates. "You have no idea you just stepped into hell, kid," Tyrone said, leaning over the table, his face close to Marcus's. "Here, I am the law. If you want to make it through tonight, you'd better learn to bow your head." Marcus didn't flinch. He just stared straight into Tyrone's eyes. He could feel the danger in the guy's voice, but he had faced scarier things than this ISIS gunman in Syria, who wouldn't hesitate to shoot at children. Compared to them, Tyrone was just a loud barking dog. "I'm not looking for trouble," Marcus said slowly, his hand still resting on the food tray. "But if you want to play, I'm not backing down." The razor claws burst into laughter, as if they'd just heard a hilarious joke. Tyrone stepped back, his eyes glinting with something that wasn't fear, but the thrill of a predator who had just spotted new prey. "All right then," he said, his voice dropping low. "You'll soon find out the price of keeping your mouth shut." As Tyrone and his crew walked away, Marcus let out a gentle sigh, but his heart raced faster than ever. He knew this wasn't over. Memories of his days in the Green Berets flooded his mind, those grueling training sessions at Fort Bragg, sleepless nights in the desert, and the feeling of holding a weapon, knowing that one tiny mistake could cost the entire team their lives. Folsom might not be a battlefield, but it was still war, and Marcus Jackson, though trapped, was still a warrior. He just didn't realize yet that true darkness was waiting for him ahead. The first night in cell number 17 at Folsom State Prison dragged on, as if time was stuck in the cramped space between 4 concrete walls. Marcus Jackson lay on the thin mattress, his eyes wide open, staring up at the stained ceiling. The raspy snores from the neighboring cell mixed with the moans of someone trapped in a nightmare. A dim light from the hallway seeped through the iron bars, casting a glow on his rugged face, highlighting his sharp features and the small scar running down his left temple, memento from explosion in Syria 5 years ago. He couldn't sleep, not because of the noise, and not because the bed felt like a rock. It was because of that feeling, the feeling of being hunted. Tyrone Razor. Evans's threat in the cafeteria echoed in his mind like a dark prophecy. "You'll soon learn the price of keeping your mouth shut." Marcus knew he wasn't joking. He had encountered guys like Tyrone before, not in prison, but on the battlefield. The warlords in Iraq, the self-proclaimed kings in the war-torn villages. They all had one thing in common. They loved control. They thrived on seeing others beg, and they never forgave anyone who dared to challenge them. Marcus sat up, his bare feet touching the cold concrete floor. He rubbed his neck, where his dog tags used to hang before they were confiscated when he was thrown in here. Memories of his days in the Green Berets flooded back like an old film. He recalled Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where he endured 18 months of grueling training to become part of the most elite special forces in the United States. The days of running 10 miles in 95-degree heat, carrying a 60-pound rucksack, while the instructor screamed, "Hurry up, Jackson! Do you want to die here or out there?" He never gave up, even when his legs felt like lead and his lungs were about to burst. It was that determination that turned him into Ghost, the man who survived missions with success rate of less than 10%. Another memory floods back, clearer and more painful. It was a time in Mosul when his team was tasked with rescuing a group of hostages from the hands of ISIS. The mission seemed impossible. 12 Green Berets facing off against over 50 armed fighters hiding in a crumbling building. Marcus had planned for 48 sleepless hours, calculating every move, every angle of fire. That night, under the dim moonlight, he led the team in, moving silently like ghosts through alleys thick with the stench of death. They succeeded, bringing 15 hostages out, but the cost was the lives of 2 teammates, Jimmy Torres and Carl Nguyen. When they returned to base, Marcus stood over their bodies, clutching their dog tags, tears unfallen, but his heart heavy, as if carrying an extra 100 pounds on his shoulders. Now, in this cramped cell, Marcus wonders if everything he ever did meant anything at all. He swore to protect his country, to defend the innocent, but in the end, he was betrayed by the very system he served. He was convicted of a non-existent crime of drug trafficking, a perfect excuse crafted so he couldn't fight back. Someone wanted him to disappear, and now he finds himself here, surrounded by people ready to kill over a cigarette or a sideways glance. The heavy footsteps in the hallway pulled Marcus back to reality. He stood up, pressing his ear against the cold metal door. 2 shadowy figures appeared through the crack, 2 prisoners, moving stealthily, holding something that glimmered under the light. Marcus recognized it immediately, a homemade knife, the kind that the infamous razor claws used. They stopped in front of the cell, whispering something to each other. Marcus's heart raced, but not out of fear. He was familiar with this feeling, the sensation right before a fight, when every sense was heightened like a taut string. "Not tonight," one guy whispered, his voice raspy. "Tyrone wants him to live a little longer. He wants him to know fear first." The other guy snickered, and then they both quietly slipped away. Marcus exhaled, but his muscles were still tense. Tyrone was playing a game of cat and mouse. He wanted Marcus to panic, to lose sleep over worry, so that when time came, he would be weak and easier to handle. But Marcus wasn't the type to break easily. He had once sat in a bunker in Syria, waiting for an airstrike, counting every second while bombs fell less than half a mile away. Compared to those days, Tyrone's mind games felt like a mere breeze. He sat back down on the bed, his hands instinctively gripping the metal frame. In the darkness, he thought of his mother, Esther Jackson, the strong woman who raised him in the Oakland slums. She used to hold him tight when he came back from the battlefield, whispering, "You are my pride, Marcus. Never forget that." But the last time he saw her, through the glass in the visiting room, her eyes were red and swollen, her hands trembling as they touched the glass. "You didn't do it, did you?" she asked. Marcus just shook his head, unable to say anything through the lump in his throat. Now, he tells himself he has to survive not just for himself, but for his mother, for those who believed in him. Tyrone and the Razor Claws might think he's an easy target, but they have no idea who they're up against. Marcus Ghost Jackson is not just a prisoner. He's a warrior, a ghost who once struck fear into his enemies. And even though he's locked away, he still carries a fire that never goes out. Tonight, he doesn't have to fight, but he knows the real battle is just around the corner. The morning sunlight filtered through the tiny window high up in cell number 17, casting faint beams of light onto the cold concrete floor. Marcus Ghost Jackson leaned against the wall, his strong hands resting on his knees. Last night, after Tyrone Razor, Evan's crew had been lurking outside his door. He hadn't slept a wink. It wasn't out of fear he had conquered that fear back in his early days with the Green Berets, but because he knew he needed to stay sharp. In this Folsom State Prison, sleep was a luxury that someone like him couldn't afford. The alarm clock blared throughout Block C, followed by the loud clanging of iron doors swinging open all at once. Marcus got up, adjusted his worn prison uniform, and stepped out into the hallway. A stream of inmates shuffled by, a few casting curious yet wary glances his way. The rumors of his brief confrontation with Tyrone in the mess hall the night before it spread like wildfire across the dry fields. Marcus didn't care. He wasn't here to gain fame or make friends. He was here to survive. The morning began with work hours. Marcus was assigned to the woodshop, a long room about 60 feet, filled with the smell of sawdust and the screeching sound of saws cutting through wood. He took a pair of worn gloves from a guard and started the task of cutting 2-inch thick boards into smaller pieces. The work was monotonous, but it gave him time to observe. The Razor Claws didn't show themselves directly, but he could feel their presence through the furtive glances from other inmates, those who acted as Tyrone's henchmen, ready to report any of his movements. As Marcus pushed a piece of wood through the saw blade, his mind drifted back to the past, not to escape, but to reclaim his strength. He recalled his last mission before leaving the military in the Syrian border region in 2018. His team was ordered to eliminate a high-ranking IS commander, the one responsible for a bombing that killed 30 civilians in a market. The mission stretched over 72 hours straight, with no sleep, no breaks, under the scorching 110-degree heat of the desert. Marcus led the team across 15 miles of sand dunes, evading enemy checkpoints, and then infiltrated the commander's hideout at midnight. He still remembered the moment his knife sliced through the enemy's throat, the warm blood spraying onto his hands, and the horrified look in the man's eyes before he fell. The mission was a success, but the price was a 4-inch scar on his shoulder, a reminder of a gunman who had lunged out from the shadows. Now, in the woodshop, Marcus wonders if he's still the ghost he once was. He used to be the nightmare of his enemies, a phantom that couldn't be caught. But here in Folsom, he has no gun, no team, no escape plan. All he has are his bare hands and an iron will. He grips the piece of wood tightly, feeling the strength still coursing through every muscle fiber. He hasn't weakened. He's just been confined. And confinement doesn't mean defeat. Lunchtime arrived, and Marcus stepped out into a roughly 100-square-foot yard, surrounded by a 12-foot-high barbed wire fence. He chose a secluded spot under the shade of an old oak tree, sat down, and chewed on a dry piece of sandwich from a food tray. The razor claws finally made their appearance. Tyrone led the way, moving slowly like a predator, with his gang trailing behind. He stopped about 15 feet away from Marcus, his pitch-black eyes gleaming with delight. "I heard you work really hard, Jackson," Tyrone said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You think those boards are going to save you from me?" Marcus looked up, his gaze calm yet piercing. He set his sandwich down, wiped his hands on his pants, and stood up. He was a few inches taller than Tyrone, and though he didn't mean to show off, his posture radiated a natural threat, a result of 12 years in the Green Berets etched into every movement. "I already told you," Marcus replied, his voice steady and low. "I don't want any trouble, but if you keep pushing, I'll show you I'm not someone to mess with." The razor claws burst into loud laughter, but Tyrone raised his hand for silence. He stepped closer, now just 3 feet away from Marcus, the smell of cigarette smoke hanging thick in the air between them. "You think you're tough, huh?" Tyrone sneered. "Here, I decide who lives and who dies. You're just a punk newcomer, and I'm going to make you beg for mercy." Marcus stood still, but in his mind, everything started to shift. He calculated the distance, the angle of attack, the number of enemies. If Tyrone struck right now, he would aim for the throat with a quick, clean blow, just like he had taken down that gunman in Mosul. But he knew the time wasn't right. This was still just a warm-up. Before Tyrone could do anything else, the guard's whistle blew, signaling the end of break time. Tyrone smirked and stepped back. "You're lucky, Jackson, but luck doesn't last forever." He turned away, his crew following behind, leaving Marcus standing alone under the shade of the tree. He watched them go, his heart beating steady but strong. Tyrone had no idea who he was really facing. He thought Marcus was a prey, but he wasn't prey, he was a caged hunter, and this cage wouldn't hold him for long. As he returned to his cell at the end of the day, Marcus sat down on the bed, his hands instinctively gripping the edge of the mattress. He thought of his mother, Esther, and her words through the glass, "You are my pride." He thought of the comrades who had fallen, those he couldn't save, and he thought of the one who had pushed him in here, a different kind of ghost, not a ghost, but the puppet master from the outside, the one who wanted him to die in silence. Marcus didn't know who it was, but he swore he would find out. He lay down, closing his eyes, but not to sleep. He was preparing. The fire within him, the fire that once blazed on a battlefield, still smoldered in the darkness of Folsom. Tyrone and the razor claws might think they were in control, but Marcus Jackson never surrendered. He was Ghost, and a ghost never dies easily. The following days at Folsom State Prison passed in a heavy atmosphere, as if the entire prison was holding its breath, waiting for a major storm. Marcus Ghost Jackson walked through a crowd of inmates in the yard, his dark brown eyes always alert, scanning every face, every movement. The confrontation with Tyrone Razor, Evans under the oak tree the day before, was not the end. It was just the beginning. He could feel it in the furtive glances from the razor claws, in the hushed whispers as he passed by. They were waiting, not for immediate revenge, but to do something bigger, something darker. That morning, Marcus stood in the woodshop, gripping a 3-foot plank as the saw's blade whined while cutting through the thick oak. The clamor of machinery couldn't drown out the thoughts racing in his mind. Tyrone wasn't acting alone. He was sure of that. The guy might be the king of Sector C, but the way he targeted Marcus, the way his goons loitered outside the pen the night before, it all felt too calculated. Someone was pulling the strings, and Marcus needed to figure out who before Razor Claw's blade reached his throat. Lunchtime arrived, and Marcus picked up his tray, which held a plate of ice-cold mashed potatoes and a tough piece of chicken. He searched for a corner table near the wall. Just as he sat down, an unexpected figure appeared across from him. It was Eddie Slim Carter, a scrawny inmate barely standing at 5'8", with messy hair and quick, darting eyes. Slim wasn't part of the Razor Claws, but he was well known for being the go-to guy for everything happening in the prison, from who owed whom how many cigarettes to the under-the-table deals between gangs. "I heard you made Tyrone hot under the collar," Slim said, his voice low but filled with curiosity. He chewed on a piece of bread, his eyes glued to Marcus. "You've got guts, but guts without caution will get you killed early." Marcus looked up, his gaze calm yet icy. "What do you want?" he asked, his hand still resting on the tray, ready to react if necessary. Slim smirked, revealing his discolored teeth. "I'm not your enemy, Jackson. I just want to get through the day. Same as you, but I've heard a few things, and I think you should know." Marcus tilted his head, signaling Slim to continue. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Razor Claws didn't just target you for no reason. Tyrone was hired, man. Someone out there wants you gone, not just a beat down, but for good." Marcus's heart raced, but he kept his expression steady. "Who?" he asked, his voice as solid as stone. Slim shrugged, glancing around to make sure no one was eavesdropping. "I don't know the name, but I heard Tyrone's crew talking about some rich guy in Sacramento. He's paying to make sure you never get out of here." Sacramento. The name echoed in Marcus's mind like a warning bell. He didn't have any personal enemies there, at least. He thought he didn't. But the way he was thrown into prison, the drug charges fabricated so perfectly, all pointed to one thing. Someone powerful wanted him silenced forever. Marcus chewed slowly on a piece of chicken, his mind spinning with unclear fragments. "Are you sure?" he asked Slim. Slim nodded, his gaze unusually serious. "I'm not joking about this. You're a big fish, Jackson, and someone wants you to sink to the bottom." As Slim walked away, Marcus sat alone, his gaze fixed on the wall across from him. He recalled the day he was arrested when the police stormed into his small apartment in Oakland, pulling out a bag of drugs he had never seen before. He screamed that he was set up, but no one listened. The judge at his trial sentenced him to 15 years in less than an hour, as if everything had been preordained. Now, with what Slim had just said, the picture began to come into sharper focus. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a conspiracy, and Tyrone was just a pawn on the chessboard. That afternoon, during free time in the yard, Marcus leaned against the barbed wire fence, his eyes watching the Razor Claws gathered near the concrete bench about 20 feet away. Tyrone was absent, but his crew, led by a big guy named Reggie Tank Johnson, was staring him down. Tank stood nearly 6'5", weighing around 250 pounds, with hands scarred from fights in prison. He smirked when he caught Marcus's gaze, then turned to whisper something to his crew. Marcus couldn't hear what was said, but he didn't need to. The way Tank carried himself, the way he moved it all screamed one thing. They were plotting something. He turned away, walking toward the corner of the yard where a few other inmates were playing basketball. But in his mind, he couldn't stop thinking about Slim's words. Sacramento, a wealthy guy, someone powerful enough to bribe cops, lawyers, and now even a gang inside the prison. Marcus had worked with a grassroots group in the Bay Area a few years back, helping them fight against a massive real estate project that wanted to bulldoze their neighborhood. He had dug deep enough to scare a few big shots. Were they out for revenge now? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing. If he didn't find a way to fight back, he wouldn't make it through this week. When the whistle signaled the end of free time, Marcus returned to the cell, his step steady but his heart heavy. He sat down on the bed, gripping the edge of the metal mattress tightly. Tyrone and Razor Claws were immediate threats, but the real enemy was the one pulling their strings. A conspiracy was tightening around him, and with each passing day, that noose grew tighter. But Marcus wasn't the type to sit back and wait for death. He was Ghost, a phantom who had survived impossible missions. And now, in this hell called Folsom, he would have to fight to survive, hour by hour, minute by minute. The night fell over Folsom State Prison like a heavy black curtain, shrouding every faint glimmer from the corridor lights. Marcus Ghost, Jackson lay on the thin mattress in cell number 17, his eyes wide open, staring at the stained ceiling. Eddie Slim Carter's words echoed in his mind. "Tyrone is on the payroll. Someone out there wants you gone." He gripped the edge of the metal bed, feeling every cold ridge under his fingertips. Sacramento, a wealthy player. The fragmented pieces began to connect, but the picture was still unclear. The only thing he was certain of was that his time was running out. The sound of soft yet purposeful footsteps echoed down the hallway. pulling Marcus out his thoughts. He sat up, his muscles tense like tightly wound strings. Through the iron door's crack, he caught sight of two figures gliding past quickly, silently, like wolves stalking their prey in the dark. The dim light from the hallway glinted off a makeshift blade in one guy's hand, the thin steel flashing a cold gleam. Marcus didn't need to look any closer to know. Razor claws were coming, and this time, they weren't just a threat. He stood up and walked over to the corner of the cell, where he had hidden a small piece of metal, a steel rod about 6 inches long that he had found in the woodshop the day before. It wasn't sharp like a knife, but it was heavy enough to serve as a weapon if necessary. Marcus gripped the steel rod tightly in his right hand, placing his left hand against the wall for balance. He took a deep breath, slowly, just like he used to do before every fight in Iraq or Syria. In the Green Berets, they taught him that fear wasn't the enemy, losing control was. And Marcus never let himself lose control. The cell door creaked open with a soft click, the sound of a lock being picked. Marcus frowned. How did they have a key? The question flashed in his mind, but there was no time to answer it. The door slowly swung open, and 2 men stepped inside. One was Reggie Tank Johnson, the hulking guy who had stared him down in the prison yard, and the other was smaller, scrawny, with a snake tattoo coiling around his neck. Tank brandished a knife, his eyes glinting with menace, while the other guy held a short wooden club, clearly something stolen from the workshop. "Playtime is over, Jackson," Tank growled, his voice deep like thunder. He stepped forward, knife raised at chest level. "Tyrone says to send his last regards." Marcus didn't respond, his gaze locked onto Tank, calculating every move. The distance between them was only 5 feet, close enough to strike, but far enough for him to react. The lanky guy shifted to the left, clearly trying to distract him, but Marcus was used to this kind of coordination from his training days at Fort Bragg. Tank lunged forward, the knife aimed straight at Marcus's chest. He leaned to the right, quick as a flash, feeling the blade skim past his left shoulder, just inches away. With a skilled move, Marcus brought his steel down onto Tank's wrist, hearing the bone crack as the knife clattered to the floor. Tank let out a scream, but before he could react, Marcus kicked hard at his knee, sending the 250-pound giant crashing down like a fallen tree. The scrawny guy shouted, charging forward with a wooden stick raised high. Marcus ducked low, dodging the downward strike, then delivered a straight punch to the guy's gut. The breath escaped him in a painful ugh, and Marcus seized the opportunity to snatch the stick from his hands, bringing it down hard on his left knee. The guy collapsed, clutching his leg and groaning. The entire attack lasted less than 30 seconds, but the noise was enough to shake the whole cell block. In the distance, the guard voice echoed, "What's going on over there?" Marcus stood tall, breathing heavily, looking at the 2 attackers sprawled out on the floor. He tossed the steel rod aside and stepped over them to check the door. The lock had been pried open with a crude tool, clearly a makeshift item crafted in prison. But the bigger question lingered. Who had given them the key? The guards couldn't possibly be unaware, unless they were willfully turning a blind eye. Marcus felt a simmering anger rise in his chest. If this plot was coming from the outside, it had infiltrated Folsom deeper than he had imagined. The sound of the guards' boots echoed sharply on the hallway floor as a figure appeared in front of the cell. It was Daniel Hayes, a tall guard with a buzz cut and a chiseled face that wore a stern expression. He surveyed the scene before him, Tank and the scrawny guy groaning on the ground, while Marcus stood in the middle of the cell, his eyes cold as steel, then furrowed his brow. "Damn it, Jackson, what the hell is going on here?" Hayes asked, his hand resting on the baton at his waist. "They came on their own," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "I was just defending myself." Hayes glanced at the 2 guys on the floor, then turned back to Marcus. There was something flickering in his eyes, not suspicion, but a mix of curiosity and something familiar. "You okay?" Hayes asked, his tone dropping. Marcus nodded, but his gaze didn't leave Hayes. He realized this guard was different from the others, not indifferent, not hostile. Did he know something? Hayes signaled the 2 other guards to drag Tank and the scrawny guy outside, then slammed the cell door shut. Before he left, he glanced at Marcus through the narrow opening. "Watch your back, Jackson. No one here is your friend." The warning rang out like a bell, but Marcus didn't need it to know the truth. He sat down on the bed, rubbing his left shoulder, where the blade had nearly cut him. No blood was flowing, but adrenaline still surged through his body. He closed his eyes, replaying the battle that had just unfolded. It wasn't just an attack. It was a warning from the puppet master. Tyrone and Razor Claws were merely the surface. Someone in Sacramento wanted him dead, and they weren't afraid to use any means necessary. Marcus pressed his lips together, the fire within him burning brighter than ever. He had survived the darkest nights on the battlefield, and Folsom would not be his grave. But to survive, he needed more than just strength, he needed answers, and he vowed to uncover them, no matter what the cost. The weak morning light filtered to the high window of Folsom State Prison, casting faint streaks of light onto the floor of cell number 17. Marcus Ghost Jackson sat on the bed, his strong hands rubbing his left shoulder, where Reggie Tank Johnson's knife had nearly cut him the night before. He wasn't injured, but his body remained tense after the fight, not from pain, but from the suffocating sense of danger tightening around him. The Razor Claws attack wasn't random. Someone had opened the cell door, and the thought that this conspiracy had outside involvement made it impossible for him to sit still. The alarm clock blared, pulling Marcus out his thoughts. He got up, adjusted his light gray prison uniform, and stepped into the hallway with the other inmates. The atmosphere today felt heavier than usual, as if everyone sensed a storm brewing. As he passed Tank's cell, Marcus glanced through the narrow opening. But the big guy wasn't there. Rumors spread quickly in prison. Tank and the scrawny guy had been locked up in solitary after last night's attack. But Marcus knew that didn't mean it was safe. Tyrone, Razor, Evans was still out there, and he wouldn't stop just because he lost two of his goons. During work hours at the woodshop, Marcus continued cutting boards, but his mind was elsewhere. The sound of saw buzzed steadily, but all he could hear was the pounding of his own heart, fierce and relentless. He thought about what Eddie Slim Carter had said. A wealthy guy in Sacramento wanted him dead. He considered how the lock on the cell had been picked. Not just anyone in prison could pull that off without getting caught. Officer Daniel Hayes had shown up too quickly after the attack, as if he had been waiting for it. Hayes knew something, and Marcus needed to find out what. During lunch break, Marcus didn't head to the cafeteria. Instead, he went straight out to the yard, seeking a hidden corner near the 12-foot barbed wire fence. He stood there, watching the Razor Claws gather about 30 feet away from him. Tyrone was in the center, looking relaxed like a king, but his gaze was sharp as he shot a glance toward Marcus. There was no immediate action. Tyrone was waiting, and Marcus knew he was plotting something bigger than just a sneak attack in the cell block. A surprising figure appeared beside him. Marcus turned around to see Daniel Hayes standing there, holding a baton but not wearing a cold mask like the other guards. "You startled me," Marcus said, his tone low but not hostile. Hayes smirked, his green eyes studying Marcus, as if trying to read his thoughts. "You don't look like the type to get startled easily, Jackson," Hayes replied. "How was last night? I heard you took down 2 Razor Claws without breaking a sweat." Marcus shrugged, his gaze fixed on Hayes. "They come to us. I just do what needs to be done." Hayes nodded, but there was something in the way he stood, slightly leaning, his grip on the baton tighter than usual that caught Marcus's attention. "You used to be a soldier, didn't you?" Hayes asked, his voice dropping. The question surprised Marcus, but he didn't let it show. "What makes you think that?" he replied, keeping his tone steady. Hayes smirked again. "The way you handled Tank. Not everyone can pull that off. I've seen guys like you in Kandahar. Special forces, right?" Marcus fell silent for a moment, contemplating. Hayes was an enemy, at least not yet, and he needed allies in this hellhole. "Green Berets," he finally spoke, his voice low but firm. 12 years. Hayes' eyes lit up, as if confirming a suspicion. "Damn," he whispered. "I knew it. I was there too, 101st Airborne. But I'm not the type to survive crazy missions like you." The unexpected connection between them lightened the mood a bit, but Marcus didn't let it distract him. "If you know who I am, why didn't you report me?" he asked, his gaze sharp. Hayes shrugged. "I don't work for the Razor Claws, Jackson. And I don't like the way they run this place like it's their personal playground. But I need to know, who did you piss off that's got them hunting you down like this? Marcus looked at Hayes for a moment, then decided to take a gamble. I'm not sure, but I heard there's a guy in Sacramento paying Tyrone to have me killed. Do you know anything about that? Hayes furrowed his brow, rubbing his chin. Sacramento, huh? I don't have a name, but I've heard some of the inmates talk about a big shot who occasionally sends money in here. Not through the official channels. Just cash passed through middlemen. I think that's how they buy off the guards. Like last night, Marcus asked, his voice growing cold. Hayes nodded slowly. Maybe. I don't have proof, but I saw another guard, a guy named Phillips, hanging around near Block C before Tank, and that other guy went into your cell. I don't think that's a coincidence. Marcus clenched his fists, a simmering rage igniting within him. If Hayes was telling the truth, this conspiracy wasn't just coming from the outside, it had burrowed deep into Folsom itself, from the inmates to the guards. Before Marcus could ask anything more, the whistle signaling the end of free time blew. Hayes patted Marcus on the shoulder, lightly but firmly. Watch yourself, Jackson. I'll keep an eye on the razor claws, but you need to stay alive. If you're right, the one behind this isn't playing around. Hayes turned away, leaving Marcus standing alone with 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. When he returned to his cell, Marcus sat down on the bed, his gaze fixed on the wall. Sacramento, a big player. Officer Phillips. The pieces started to come together, but he still lacked the name of the person who had pushed him in here and wanted him dead. He thought back to the project in the Bay Area, the powerful figures he had faced off against. One name surfaced in his memory. Vincent Caldwell, a real estate mogul in Sacramento, who had lost millions when Marcus helped the people win their case. Could it be him? He wasn't sure, but he would find out. And when he did, no prison would be big enough to protect that guy from him. The sky over Folsom State Prison was pitch black, with only a few faint beams of light from the security lamps illuminating the vast prison yard. Marcus Ghost. Jackson stood in a shadowy corner of the yard, his dark brown eyes scanning the group of inmates gathered during the evening free time. After his conversation with Daniel Hayes the day before, he knew he didn't have much time left. Tyrone Razor Evans and the Razor Claws wouldn't wait long. They had failed once in the cell block, and this time they would strike harder and faster. Marcus could feel it in every hostile glare, in every furtive movement of Tyrone's crew. He leaned against the 12-foot barbed wire fence, hands shoved deep in his pockets, pretending to be nonchalant. But in his mind, he was calculating. Hayes had confirmed his suspicions. This conspiracy wasn't just coming from within Folsom, but from a big shot in Sacramento, possibly Vincent Caldwell, the guy who had lost millions because of him. The guard Phillips, the one Hayes mentioned, was also a key player. If Phillips was involved, then the cell break last night wasn't a coincidence. Marcus needed to act before the blade of Razor Claws found his neck again. Tyrone's raspy laughter echoed from the concrete bench about 20 feet away. Marcus glanced over and saw him standing among at least 6 of his goons, all of them big and wearing menacing expressions. Tyrone wasn't holding a weapon, but his eyes sparkled like a predator ready to pounce. He smirked when he caught Marcus's gaze, then leaned in to whisper something to a guy with a red claw tattoo on his arm. Marcus recognized it instantly. It was a signal. They were going to strike, right here, right now. He stepped away from the fence, slowly making his way to the center of the yard, where the security lights shone brighter. If he had to fight, he wanted space to move, not to be cornered like in a cell. The Razor Claws began to spread out, forming a loose circle around him, like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. Tyrone stepped forward, about 10 feet away, his hands shoved in his pockets, but Marcus knew that was just a ruse. You think surviving last night makes you some kind of hero, Jackson? Tyrone growled, his voice dripping with contempt. You're just delaying the inevitable. Marcus stood tall, his broad shoulders squared, his gaze as cold as steel. You talk too much, Tyrone, he replied, his voice deep yet sharp. If you want me dead, go ahead. Don't just stand there barking like a dog. The Razor Claws erupted in laughter, but Tyrone raised his hand for silence, his eyes darkening. You want to die quick? Fine, he said, snapping his fingers. 3 guys from the circle charged forward, each wielding a makeshift weapon, a wooden club, an 8-inch blade, and a sharp, curved steel rod. Marcus didn't wait for them to get close. He charged at the guy with the wooden bat first, dodging a downward swing by rolling to the left, then delivering a powerful kick to the guy's knee. The sound of cracking bone echoed, and the guy went down, howling in pain. The knife wielder lunged right after, the blade aimed straight at Marcus's stomach. He spun around, grabbed the guy's wrist, twisting it back until the knife clattered to the ground, then landed a solid punch to his jaw. The third guy, wielding a curved steel pipe, swung his weapon towards Marcus's head, but Marcus ducked low, kicking the guy in the stomach, sending him crashing backward, his head slamming against the concrete floor. The whole yard fell silent for a moment, with only Marcus's heavy breathing and the groans of the 3 guys sprawled out on the ground. But Tyrone wouldn't let him rest. He shouted, "Finish him off!" And the other 3 lunged at once. Marcus grabbed the wooden stick from the first guy, twirling it in his hand like a familiar weapon from his Green Beret training days. He blocked the first guy's punch with the stick, then swung hard at his knee, sending him crashing down. The second guy lunged with a knife from the right, but Marcus dodged, using the stick to smash into his hand, sending the knife flying 5 feet away. The last guy charged him with his bare fist, but Marcus delivered a straight punch to his nose, hearing the crack of bone before the guy fell backward. Tyrone stood there, his face darkening, fists clenched tight. Marcus was panting, the club in his hand still raised, his gaze locked onto the ringleader. "What about you, Tyrone?" he asked, his voice as cold as ice. "Or do you just send others to die in your place?" Tyrone scoffed, but the smirk couldn't hide his fury. "You think you've won, Jackson? You're not getting away. They're paying me a lot to see you dead, and I'm going to see it through." Before Marcus could respond, the guard's whistle pierced the air, cutting through the tension like a knife. Daniel Hayes led a group of guards charging into the yard, batons raised high. "Get out of here now," Hayes shouted, his gaze sweeping over the scene of 5 razor claws sprawled on the ground, with Marcus standing in the middle, holding a stick. Tyrone backed away, blending into a crowd of inmates, but his eyes shot daggers at Marcus, a silent promise. This isn't over. Hayes stepped closer to Marcus, his voice low but urgent. "Are you out of your mind, Jackson? Fighting right here in the courtyard?" Marcus threw down the bat, exhaling heavily. "They didn't give me a choice," he replied. Hayes studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you, but this is going to make things worse. Tyrone won't let this slide." Marcus smirked, his eyes showing no fear. "Neither will I." As the guard dispersed the crowd, Marcus was led back to his cell, but he didn't feel defeated. He had just survived another battle, and each battle brought him one step closer to the truth. Tyrone had let slip a detail. "They're paying me a lot of money." Vincent Caldwell, or someone in Sacramento, was pulling out all the stops to kill him. But Marcus wasn't prey. He was a cage hunter, and he wouldn't let them win easily. When the cell door slammed shut, he sat down, fists clenched tight. His fight for survival had only just begun, and he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The door of cell number 17 slammed shut behind Marcus Ghost Jackson, the sound of metal clashing echoing in the cramped space of Block C. He sank down onto the thin mattress, his breath still heavy from the fight outside in the yard. His hands, though not bleeding, throbbed with pain from the blows he had delivered to take down the razor claws. The dim light from the hallway seeped through a crack under the door, casting a glow on his rugged face, where his dark brown eyes shone with unwavering determination. Tyrone Razor, Evans had lost this time, but Marcus knew he would be back, and next time he wouldn't hold back. He leaned against the cold concrete wall, his hand rubbing the spot on his neck where the Green Beret's dog tag used to hang, now just a distant memory. The recent battle wasn't just a test of strength. It was a declaration that he was still Ghost, the specter that had once instilled fear in the hearts of enemies on the battlefield. But Tyrone's words, spoken just before the guard interrupted, still echoed in his mind. "They're paying me a lot of money to see you dead." Vincent Caldwell, or anyone else in Sacramento, had turned Folsom into a deadly arena, and Marcus was the prime target. He closed his eyes, letting his mind drift back to the days in the Bay Area. when he helped the community fight against Caldwell's real estate project. He remembered the meetings in that small room in Oakland, where he sat with them, analyzing contracts and pointing out legal loopholes. They had scored a tiny victory against a giant like Caldwell, but now he realized the cost of it. He had made him lose millions, tarnishing his reputation in front of investors. And now, Caldwell was getting his revenge by throwing him in jail, turning him into prey for the razor claws. The soft footsteps in the hallway made Marcus open his eyes. Through the crack of the door, he saw the familiar figure of Daniel Hayes. The guard stopped, looking at him through the bars. "You okay, Jackson?" Hayes asked, his voice low but sincere. Marcus nodded slowly. "Still alive," he replied, managing a faint smile. Hayes nodded back, his hand gripping the baton tightly. "I just heard from another guard. Tyrone is going crazy about what happened in the yard. He's not going to let it go." "I know," Marcus said, his gaze locked on Hayes. "But I need you to help me with something. Find out what Officer Phillips is up to. If he's involved, I need proof." Hayes frowned but didn't refuse. "I'll give it a shot. But if I'm right, that guy in Sacramento isn't just paying Tyrone. He's funding the whole system in here. You're up against something bigger than you think." When Hayes left, Marcus lay down on the bed, his hand resting on his forehead. He wasn't afraid. He was used to facing bigger enemies, from the IS gunmen in Mosul to sleepless nights in Syria. But this time he had no team, no weapons, just himself and a fragile glimmer of hope from Hayes. He thought about his mother, Esther, and her red-rimmed eyes during the prison visit. He thought about the people he had once helped in the Bay Area, those who might not even know he was fighting to survive for them. Dawn would come soon, but Marcus knew it was just the calm before the storm. Tyrone, Razor Claws, Phillips, and the puppet master in Sacramento were all tightening the noose around him, but he didn't flinch. He was Ghost, and ghosts never surrender. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to prepare. His fight for survival wasn't over, it had only just begun. Dawn at Folsom State Prison didn't bring any peace. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the small window of cell number 17, casting a glow on the rugged face of Marcus Ghost Jackson. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands gripping the iron frame tightly, his breath steady yet heavy after a sleepless night. The battle with the Razor Claws in the prison yard last night still echoed in his mind, the sound of bones breaking, the growl of Tyrone Razor, Evans, and the chilling threat. "They're paying me a lot of money to see you dead." Marcus knew he wasn't joking, and the plot from Sacramento was tightening around him like a noose. The alarm clock blared, harsh and jarring, pulling him out of his thoughts. He got up, adjusted his pale gray prison uniform, and stepped into the hallway with the other inmates. The atmosphere today felt different, more tense, more suffocating. News of last night's fight had spread throughout Folsom, and the looks from the other prisoners were now not just curious, but tinged with a hint of fear as they glanced at him. Marcus didn't care. He wasn't here to make friends or enemies. He was here to survive, and if necessary, to fight. During work hours at the woodshop, Marcus held a 2-inch thick board, pushing it through the saw blade with absolute focus. The machinery whirred steadily, but his ears were tuned to every sound around him. The Razor Claws didn't show themselves directly, but he could feel their presence through the furtive glances from the other inmates, Tyrone's henchmen waiting for their chance. He thought about what Daniel Hayes had said the night before. The guy in Sacramento isn't just paying Tyrone, he's paying off the whole system in here. If Officer Phillips was really involved, then Marcus wasn't just up against a gang, he was up against an entire network. During lunch break, Marcus didn't head to the cafeteria. Instead, he walked straight out to the yard, seeking a hidden corner beneath the shade of an old oak tree about 10 feet from the barbed wire fence. He stood there, observing the crowd, his hands tucked in his pockets to maintain an air of calm. But then, an unexpected figure approached Eddie Slim Carter, the wiry inmate with quick, darting eyes. Slim smirked as he sat down on a nearby bench. "You've got the whole Folsom buzzing, Jackson," he said, his voice low but filled with curiosity. "You took on 5 Razor Claws and still stand here. You're not just an ordinary guy, are you?" Marcus glanced at Slim, his expression unchanged. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steady and low. Slim shrugged, chewing on a piece of bread he had taken from the tray. "I just want to say, You just poked a hornet's nest. Tyrone doesn't like to lose, and he's going to get his revenge. I've heard he's planning something big, not just a sneak attack, but a full-on assault. Marcus tilted his head, signaling Slim to go on. Slim leaned in closer, whispering, "Tonight, in the bathroom. They know you usually shower late. Tyrone wants to make an example out of you for the whole C block." Tim Marcus's heart raced, but he kept his expression cool. The bathroom was a secluded spot, rarely visited by guards in the evening, in full shadows. A perfect trap. "Are you sure?" he asked. Slim nodded, his gaze serious. "I'm not here to mess around. I just thought you should know, since you don't seem like the type to go down easily." Slim stood up and left without another word, leaving Marcus with a big question. Why was that guy helping him? But he didn't have time to dig deeper. He needed to get ready. As dusk fell, Marcus returned to his cell, sat down on the bed, and began to think. He didn't have the steel weapon he had used the night before. It had been confiscated. But he had something Razor Claws would never understand. Experience. During his time in the Green Berets, he had survived ambushes without a gun, relying only on a knife and his wits. He recalled a mission in Mosul when he had been separated from his team in a crumbling building. Facing 3 ISIS gunmen, he had used a shard of broken tile to take down the first one, then finished off the other 2 with the very AK of the first man. Folsom was no different from Mosul. It was just a battlefield with a new name. He stood up, pacing back and forth in a cramped cell that was barely 10 square feet, his muscles tensing as he envisioned the upcoming fight. The shower was a dangerous place, but it was also an opportunity. If Tyrone wanted to turn him into a lesson, then he would turn that guy into a failure. He thought of his mother, Esther, and her words through the glass, "You are my pride." He thought of the teammates who had fallen in Syria, the ones he couldn't save. He couldn't let them down. He couldn't let himself fail. When the evening freedom bell rang, Marcus stepped out of his cell, heading toward the bathroom. He wore his prison uniform, but underneath, he had a small 8-inch piece of wood he had picked up from the workshop in his sleeve. It wasn't the perfect weapon, but it was enough to catch someone off guard. The bathroom was at the end of Block C, a long 30-foot room with rusty faucets and a damp tile floor. As he entered, an unusual silence filled the air, no chatter, no sound of running water, only the dim shadows cast by a few hanging lights. Marcus stopped, standing under a water spout, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. He knew they were coming. The heavy footsteps echoed from the entrance, and Tyrone appeared, followed by 4 Razor Claws, each wielding a knife or a club. Tyrone smirked, his eyes glinting with cruelty. "Welcome to your last day, Jackson," he said, his voice icy cold. Marcus didn't respond, just offered a faint smile. The latent power within him, the power of the ghost, was ready to explode. The shower room in Section C of Folsom State Prison was drenched in a dim, eerie light, with a hanging bulb swaying gently from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows that danced across the damp tile floor. Marcus Ghost Jackson stood beneath a rusty showerhead, his hands relaxed, but his sharp gaze sweeping over the 5 figures who had just entered. Tyrone Razor. Evans led the way, tall and menacing, followed by 4 Razor Claws, each wielding a makeshift weapon, an 8-inch steel knife, a wooden bat, a bent metal rod, and a tightly coiled piece of wire like a whip. The air was thick with the musty smell of mildew and tension, as if the entire room was aware that a life-or-death battle was about to unfold. Tyrone stopped about 10 feet away from Marcus, smirking with the confidence of someone who knows they have the upper hand. "You've got nowhere to run now, Jackson," he growled, his voice deep and menacing. "Tonight, I'm going to show everyone in Folsom the price of crossing me." Marcus didn't respond. He just stood there, feet slightly apart, muscles tense beneath his prison uniform. He felt the 8-inch piece of wood hidden in his sleeve. It wasn't the ideal weapon, but it was enough to get him started. He didn't need words to answer Tyrone. His actions would speak for him. The guy with the knife lunged forward, the steel blade glinting as it stabbed straight toward Marcus's chest. He leaned to the right, quick as a flash, feeling the blade skim past his left shoulder, just inches away. With a practiced move, Marcus pulled a piece of wood from his sleeve and slammed it hard against the guy's wrist. A sharp crack echoed as the bone snapped. The knife clattered into the floor, and before the guy could let out a scream, Marcus delivered a kick to his knee, sending him crashing down, water splashing across the tile floor. Tyrone roared, "Take him down!" The other three lunged forward at once, like a pack of bloodthirsty beasts. One of them swung a wooden bat down hard, but Marcus ducked low, rolled to the left, and jabbed a piece of wood straight into the guy's gut. The breath escaped him in a painful ugh, and Marcus seized a chance to snatch the bat from his hands, bringing it down hard on the guy's head. He collapsed, smashing his face against the floor, motionless. The guy with the bent metal rod charging right after, swinging the weapon toward Marcus's head. Marcus raised a wooden bat to block it, the clash of metal against it ringing out painfully, then kicked hard into Guy's chest, sending him stumbling back 5 feet, crashing against the wall. The last guy, with a steel wire, swung hard at Marcus's legs, trying to tie him up. Marcus jumped back, the wire just slicing through the air a few inches away from him. He lunged forward at the guy, yanked the wire back, and landed a straight punch to his face. Blood sprayed from the guy's nose, and Marcus finished him off with a kick to the stomach, making him crumple down, clutching his belly and groaning. All 4 guys were sprawled out on the bathroom floor, water dripping from the faucet, mixing with blood, creating splotchy red streaks. Tyrone stood there, his face darkening, fists clenched tight. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he shouted, stepping closer. "You can't get away, Jackson. I'm going to snap your neck myself." Marcus panted, the wooden bat still raised, his gaze locked onto Tyrone. "Go ahead, try it," he replied, his voice as cold as ice. Tyrone charged forward, unarmed but fueled by the strength of a guy standing 6'3" and weighing nearly 220 pounds. He threw a punch at Marcus's face, but Marcus dodged to the left, feeling the rush of air from the fist brush past his ear. Marcus countered immediately, smashing the wooden bat against Tyrone's elbow, hearing the joint crack with sharp snap. Tyrone let out a scream, but he didn't stop. With his other hand, he grabbed Marcus by the collar and yanked hard. The two struggled, their feet slipping on the wet floor, breaths coming in ragged gasps mixed with growls. Tyrone pinned Marcus against the wall, his hand tightening around Marcus's throat. "Die!" he yelled, his face flushed with rage. But Marcus didn't panic. He recalled the training sessions at Fort Bragg on how to escape a chokehold in 3 seconds. He kicked hard at Tyrone's knee, throwing him off balance, then followed up with a punch to the temple. Tyrone staggered back, releasing his grip, and Marcus finished with a kick to the chest, sending him crashing to the floor. The whole family was silent in the bathroom. Only the sound of water dripping from the faucet and Marcus's heavy breathing could be heard. He stood tall, staring at Tyrone lying motionless, blood trickling from his temple and mixing with the puddle on the floor. For other razor claws were groaning on the ground, too weak to get up. Marcus threw the wooden stick down, rubbing his neck where Tyrone's hand had left a red mark. He didn't feel victorious. He only felt the weight of survival, but he knew this was bigger than just a fight. Tyrone hadn't acted alone. Vincent Caldwell, or anyone else in Sacramento, had turned Folsom into his battlefield. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the entrance. Daniel Hayes burst into the bathroom, baton raised high, followed by 2 other guards. Hayes stopped, eyes wide as he took in the scene before him. 5 razor claws sprawled out on the floor, with Marcus standing in the middle, his gaze icy. "Damn it, Jackson," Hayes exclaimed, his voice a mix of shock and concern. "What the hell did you just do?" Marcus exhaled, his shoulders slightly relaxing. "Survived," he replied, his voice hoarse. Hayes signaled for 2 guards to drag the razor claws outside, then turned back to Marcus. "You just made a mess of things," he said, his voice dropping. "But I have to admit, you're unlike anyone I've ever met." Marcus didn't smile, just nodded. "I had no choice, Hayes. They want me dead." Hayes looked at him for a moment, then nodded back. "I know, but this won't end here. Tyrone will be back, and next time it'll be worse." As Hayes walked away, Marcus stood alone in the bathroom, water still dripping from the faucet. He looked at his hands that had once taken down enemies on the battlefield, now stained with blood in prison. The latent power of ghosts had erupted, but he knew this was just beginning. His fight for survival wasn't over. It was only just starting to reach a new peak. If your heart beats at the unstoppable power of Marcus as he turns darkness into light, hit like and subscribe. Follow the Legendary Narratives channel to witness how an ordinary man becomes a legend. Thank you. The shower room in Zone C at Folsom State Prison was now as quiet as a graveyard, with only the sound of water dripping steadily from a faucet onto the damp tile floor. Marcus Ghost. Jackson stood in the middle of the room, his breath heavy yet steady, his dark brown eyes scanning the 5 razor claws sprawled out around him. Tyrone Razor. Evans lay unconscious near the wall, blood trickling from his temple, creating a crimson streak on the tile floor, while the other 4 groaned in pain. Daniel Hayes and 2 guards had just left, dragging away the defeated, leaving Marcus with a heavy silence of victory. But he didn't feel victorious. He only felt the cost of survival. He walked over to a water faucet, splashing cold water on his face, feeling the stream wash away the sweat and a bit of blood from the fight. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but because the adrenaline was still coursing through his body. The battle just now was proof of his hidden strength, a power he had suppressed since the day he was thrown into Folsom. He was Ghost, the specter that had once terrified enemies in Mosul and Syria, and tonight he reminded himself that that ghost was still alive, even if trapped within 4 concrete walls. Marcus leaned against the wall, rubbing his neck where Tyrone's handprint still lingered red. He recalled the moment the guy tightened his grip, that wild look in his eyes as he screamed, "Die!" If it hadn't been for 12 years of Green Beret training, he wouldn't have escaped not through sheer strength, but through sheer awareness. He thought about Fort Bragg, those days of running 15 miles with a 60-pound pack, the sparring sessions with teammates to learn how to break free from a deadly hold. All of that saved him tonight, but he knew the cost. Tyrone wouldn't forgive, and the guy in Sacramento, possibly Vincent Caldwell, would be even more determined. The sound of the guards' boots thudding on the hallway floor echoed once more. Marcus turned around to see Daniel Hayes stepping in, alone without the 2 guards. Hayes stopped about 5 feet away, his green eyes scanning the bathroom before settling on Marcus. "You okay, Jackson?" he asked, his voice low but sincere. Marcus nodded, wiping the water from his face with his sleeve. "Still alive," he replied, forcing a faint smile, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, just a habit to mask his exhaustion. Hayes stepped closer, hands shoved in his pockets, looking relaxed but with a watchful eye. "I just put Tyrone and the gang in solitary," he said. "But you know this isn't over, right? Tyrone will be back, and next time he'll bring the whole Razor Claws crew." Marcus looked at Hayes, his gaze sharp. "I know, but I need you to dig deeper into Phillips. If he's involved, I need proof before things get out of hand." Hayes furrowed his brow and nodded slowly. "I've been keeping an eye on Phillips for a while. He often takes envelopes from inmates, not food or cigarettes, but cash. I'll dig deeper, but you need to be careful. If that guy in Sacramento is paying both Tyrone and Phillips, then you're not just a target. You're a threat to him." Marcus clenched his fists, a simmering rage igniting within him. "Good," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "Because I'm a threat to them too." Hayes patted Marcus on the shoulder, lightly but firmly, then turned away. "Stay alive, Jackson. I'll let you know if anything changes." As Hayes disappeared through the door, Marcus stood alone in the bathroom, the dim light casting his shadow like a ghost amidst the water and blood. He thought about his mother, Esther, and her red-rimmed eyes when he was sentenced. He thought about the people in the Bay Area, the ones he had once protected from Vincent Caldwell. He couldn't let them down. He couldn't let himself fall apart. Back in the cell, Marcus sat down on the bed, rubbing his neck. The fight in the bathroom wasn't just a battle with razor claws. It was a declaration. Tyrone and his crew now knew he wasn't an easy target. But he also understood the price of that. The whole of Folsom was buzzing, and the name Jackson was now the center of attention. He heard whispers from the neighboring cells. Some inmates were curious, while others were scared. "That guy took down Tyrone," a raspy voice echoed. "He's not just some ordinary dude." Marcus closed his eyes, let his mind drift back to the days on the battlefield. He remembered the night in Syria, when he led his team through a mine-filled valley, with no moonlight, only instinct guiding their way. They survived, but the feeling of being hunted never left him. Now in Folsom, he felt again, but this time he had no team, no gun, just himself. He thought about Vincent Caldwell, the real estate mogul in Sacramento, the one who might be behind it all. If Caldwell wanted him dead, then he had picked the wrong guy to mess with. He opened his eyes, peering through the iron bars. Tonight, the power of ghosts had erupted, but he knew it wasn't enough. Tyrone would be back, and next time would be a bigger fight. He needed more than just strength. He needed a plan. He needed allies. Daniel Hayes was a start, but Marcus knew he had to protect himself first. He lay down on the bed, not sleeping, but strategizing. His fight for survival was reaching a new peak, and he wouldn't let anyone, Tyrone, Phillips, or Caldwell, pull him down. The whistle signaling lights out echoed, and Folsom slipped into darkness. But in cell number 17, the fire within Marcus still burned, the flame of a ghost that would never surrender. He closed his eyes, not to rest, but to prepare. Tomorrow would be another day, and he would be ready to face whatever lay ahead. The scorching midday sun beat down on the vast concrete yard of Folsom State Prison, turning the hot pavement into a giant frying pan. Marcus Ghost Jackson stood near the 12-foot barbed wire fence, his dark brown eyes scanning the group of inmates gathered during their free time. The fight in the shower last night still echoed in his mind. He could feel it in every glance directed at him, ranging from curiosity to fear and even hostility lurking in the shadows. Tyrone Razor, Evans and 4 of his Razor Claws were locked up in solitary confinement, but Marcus knew this wasn't over. Daniel Hayes had warned him, Tyrone will be back, and next time it'll be worse. He believed it, and today he felt it coming. He leaned against the fence, hands stuffed in his pockets, pretending to be nonchalant like any other day. But inside he was ready, muscles tensed, senses sharp like they were back on the battlefield. He thought about Hayes' words regarding Officer Phillips, the guy who was taking cash from a middleman, possibly a lackey of Vincent Caldwell. If Phillips was involved, then Razor Claws weren't just a bunch of thugs in prison. They were puppets of a powerful figure on the outside. Marcus needed to survive today to uncover the truth, and he knew the cost wouldn't be cheap. A hoarse laugh echoed from the concrete bench about 30 feet away. Marcus turned around to see a group of Razor Claws, not the 5 guys from last night, but a whole new crowd, at least 8 of them, gathered around a tall guy with tightly braided hair and a red claw tattoo on his neck. It was Jamal Claw Harris, the right-hand man of Tyrone, who was just as notorious and ruthless as the leader himself. Jamal stood up, his eyes flashing with aggression as he locked onto Marcus, then signaled to his crew. They began to spread out, forming a wide circle around the yard, like a pack of wolves getting ready to pounce. Marcus stepped away from the fence and walked out into the yard where the sunlight poured down. He wanted space to move, not to be cornered like in the shower. Jamal approached, about 15 feet away, holding a 10-inch metal rod, tapping it lightly against his palm. Tyrone sends his regards from the whole Jackson, he said, his voice deep but dripping with disdain. He told me to finish what he couldn't. You're dead for sure. Marcus stood tall, his broad shoulders squared, his gaze as cold as steel. You sound just like Tyrone, he replied, but I'm still standing here. Want to give a shot? Jamal let out a loud laugh, the sound echoing across the yard, catching the attention of the other inmates. You sure have a tough mouth, he growled, then snapped his fingers. The Razor Claws charged in, 8 of them at once, makeshift weapons glinting in the sunlight, knives, clubs, iron rods, even a tightly coiled piece of wire. Marcus took a deep breath, his body shifting into fight mode. He was unarmed, but he had 12 years of experience in the Green Berets, where he learned how to turn anything into an advantage. The first guy, wielding a knife, lunged straight from Marcus's chest. He leaned to the left, grabbed the guy's wrist, and twisted it back until the knife clattered to the ground. Then he threw a punch to the jaw. The guy staggered back, blood spraying from his mouth. 2 more guys charged in from either side, one swinging a bat, the other cracking a steel wire. Marcus ducked low, dodging the bat, then jumped back just in time for the wire to whip through the air inches from him. He picked up the fallen knife and quickly stabbed a guy with a bat in the thigh, causing him to drop down. Then he turned and kicked the guy with the wire in the stomach, sending him crashing backward 5 feet. Three guys attacked at the same time, iron bars and knives glinting in the air. Marcus rolled to the right, dodging a stab, then used his knife to block the iron bar from the second guy, pushing back so the bar slammed into his face. The third guy swung a knife from the left, but Marcus grabbed his hand, spun around, and used the guy's own momentum to slam him down to the ground. The last one charging with a bare fist, but Marcus sidestepped, delivering a kick to the knee that sent him crashing face first into the concrete. Jamal stood there, his face darkening, gripping the metal bar tightly. "You're dead meat," he shouted, charging forward with the force of a 240-pound beast. Marcus stayed still, waiting until the last possible moment, then leaned to the side, letting the bar skim just 2 inches past his shoulder. He stabbed a knife into Jamal's forearm, hearing him scream as blood spilled onto the floor, then followed up with a punch to his temple. Jamal staggered but didn't fall, turned to grab Marcus by the collar, slamming him against the fence. "You can't win this," he growled, his hand tightening around Marcus's throat. But Marcus didn't panic. He kicked hard into Jamal's knee, causing him to buckle, then pushed him away with both hands, landing a flurry of punches to his face. Jamal fell back, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. Marcus stood tall, panting, surveying the 8 guys sprawled out around the yard. The other inmates were silent, eyes wide, unable to believe what had just unfolded. He tossed the knife down, rubbed his neck, his gaze still sharp as ice. The whistle of the guard echoed, and Daniel Hayes rushed into the yard, followed by 3 other guards. "What the hell is going on?" Hayes shouted, his gaze sweeping over the fallen Razor Claws and Marcus standing in the middle. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You've lost it, Jackson, but I gotta say you're a machine." Marcus exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. "They didn't give me a choice," he replied. Hayes nodded, signaling for the guards to take the others away. "Watch your back," he said before turning to leave. Marcus stood alone in the courtyard, the sun shining down on him like a halo. The power of Ghost had erupted once again, but he knew the cost. Everyone in Folsom now saw him as a threat. Tyrone, Jamal, and that guy from Sacramento wouldn't back down. But he wouldn't back down either. He was a ghost, and ghosts never fall. The yard of Folsom State Prison is now eerily quiet, as if the entire space has just witnessed a storm and is waiting for the aftermath. Marcus, Ghost, Jackson stand in the middle of the yard, the harsh sunlight beating down, casting his shadow long across the scorching concrete. Around him, 8 Razor Claws, led by Jamal Claw Harris, lie sprawled out, blood and sweat mingling on the ground. The sound of the guard's whistle still echoes in his mind, and the image of Daniel Hayes leading the guard team charging into the yard is still vivid. But now, with the crowd dispersed, Marcus stands alone, his breath gradually steadying, his strong hands hanging loosely at his sides. He walked over to the nearby concrete bench, sat down, and rubbed his neck where Jamal's grip had left a red mark from the recent scuffle. The fight in the yard wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a declaration. Razor Claws now knew he wasn't an easy target, and even Folsom was whispering about him. He could hear the murmurs from the group of inmates standing about 20 feet away. That Jackson guy is really something, taking down Jamal, and those guys without spilling a drop of blood. Marcus didn't care about what they were saying. He wasn't here to impress anyone, he was here to survive, and each fight was a step closer to the truth. He closed his eyes, let his mind drift back to the days in the Green Berets. He remembered the mission in Iraq, when he led his team through an occupied village, facing 20 insurgents with just 6 men. That night, under the dim moonlight, he took down 5 of them by himself, using a knife and a pistol, moving silently like a ghost through the smoke and gunfire. Today's battle wasn't much different. No guns, no team, but with the same instinct. Survive at all costs. He opened his eyes, looking at his hands that had once been stained with enemy blood, now fighting to protect him in this hell called Folsom. The sound of soft footsteps pulled Marcus out of his thoughts. He turned around to see Daniel Hayes approaching, hands in his pockets, looking relaxed but with a worried expression in his eyes. Hayes stopped about 5 feet away, glancing around the front yard before speaking. "You just turned yourself into a legend, Jackson," he said, his voice low but tinged with admiration. "But you also just made yourself a target. Tyrone and Jamal aren't going to let this slide. Marcus shrugged, his gaze unwavering. I didn't choose this, Hayes. They forced my hand. Hayes nodded, sitting down on the bench beside him about 2 feet away. I know. I just talked to another guard. Phillips isn't here today, but I heard he took money from some middleman last night. It looks like someone is speeding up the process to take you down. Marcus clenched his fists, a simmering anger rising within him. Vincent Caldwell, he said, his voice icy. If it's him, I wouldn't be surprised. Hayes frowned, staring intently at Marcus. Do you know that guy? Marcus nodded slowly. I once cost him a big deal in the Bay Area. Helped some folks keep their land, made his project fall apart. He might want revenge now. Hayes rubbed his chin, deep in thought. If that's the case, you're not just up against razor claws. You're up against a whole system. Phillips is just a part of it. I'll dig deeper, but you need to stay alive longer than I thought. Marcus looked at Hayes, his gaze sharp but not hostile. Thanks, Hayes. I didn't expect anyone in here to have my back. Hayes smirked slightly. I don't like to raise their claws running Folsom like it's their playground. And I owe guys like you special ops from the days back in Kandahar. I'll do what I can. He stood up, patting Marcus on the shoulder before leaving. Watch your back, Jackson. As Hayes disappeared behind the door of the holding cell, Marcus sat alone, sunlight streaming onto his face. He thought about his mother, Esther, and her red-rimmed eyes during their visit. He thought about the people in the Bay Area, those he had once protected from Caldwell. His power, the power of the ghost, had flared up twice in the past 24 hours, but he knew it wasn't enough. Tyrone, Jamal, Phillips, and Caldwell all were threats, and he needed more than just strength to get through this. He needed a plan, allies, and above all, he needed to keep a cool head. The whistle signaling the end of free time blared, and Marcus stood up, walking toward the cell block. The group of inmates scattered as he passed by, their eyes a mix of fear and respect. He didn't care. He didn't need their respect. He just needed to survive to face the one behind it all. As he entered his cell, he sat down on the bed, his hands gripping the edge of the metal mattress. The fight outside had shaken the order in Folsom, but he knew it was just the beginning. Razor Claws would be back, and next time it would be a bigger battle. He laid down, closed his eyes, and let his mind settle. He thought about the days in Syria, when he was huddled in a shelter, waiting for an airstrike, counting every second while bombs fell less than half a mile away. He had survived those nights, and he would survive Folsom. The strength of Ghost wasn't just muscle or skill. It was willpower, a fire that never went out. He thought about Vincent Caldwell, the real estate mogul in Sacramento, the guy who could have turned his life into hell. If it was Caldwell, then he would soon learn that Marcus was not someone who could be easily broken. The darkness fell as the siren's lights went out, and Folsom sank into silence. Marcus lay there, not asleep, but deep in thought. His struggle for survival was reaching a new peak, but he wasn't afraid. He was Ghost, a specter who never surrendered, and no matter how harsh Folsom got, he would find a way to push through. Tomorrow would be another day, and he would be ready not just to survive, but to fight for the truth. Darkness enveloped Folsom State Prison as the lights-out siren blared, pulling block sea into a heavy silence. Marcus Ghost, Jackson lay on a thin mattress in cell number 17, his wide eyes staring up at the stained ceiling. The fight in the prison yard earlier that afternoon still echoed in his mind the growl of Jamal Claw Harris, the crunch of bones beneath his fists, and the stunned expressions of the inmates as he took down 8 razor claws. He had survived once again, but the cost was that now all of Folsom viewed him as a threat, not just to the thugs, but to the very system that backed them. He sat up, rubbing his neck where Jamal's fingerprints still left a lingering ache. The power of Ghost had erupted twice in less than 24 hours, once in the bathroom and again outside, but Marcus knew it wasn't enough to keep him alive forever. Tyrone, Razor Evans, and Jamal were in solitary confinement, but Razor Claws was still out there, and the puppet master in Sacramento, possibly Vincent Caldwell, wouldn't stop. Daniel Hayes had confirmed his suspicions. Officer Phillips was involved, and if that was true, he wasn't just facing off against the inmates, but against an entire web of corruption deeply rooted in Folsom. The soft sound of footsteps in the hallway made Marcus tense up. He stood up, pressing himself against the wall, ready to face razor claws if they attacked again. But through the iron bars, he saw the familiar figure of Hayes. The guard stopped, looking at him through bars, his green eyes glinting in the dim light. "You still awake, Jackson?" Hayes asked, his voice low but sincere. Marcus shrugged and stepped out from the corner. "Sleeping isn't really an option here," he replied, his voice hoarse after a long day. Hayes nodded, gripping his baton tightly but not looking hostile. "I just checked the isolation unit. Tyrone and Jamal are screaming for revenge. You've really stirred up a hornet's nest." Marcus smirked slightly. "I didn't choose this. They forced my hand." Hayes studied him for a moment, then lowered his voice. "I know, and I have news for you about Phillips. He's not just taking money from the middleman. I saw him talking to a stranger outside the main gate yesterday, neither a prisoner nor a guard. The guy was driving a black SUV, license plate from Sacramento." Tim Marcus slammed his fist down harder, but he kept his expression icy. "Caldwell," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "He could be his henchman." Hayes furrowed his brow, tilting his head. "Are you sure?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I once cost him a huge deal in the Bay Area. If it's him, everything lines up to fake conviction. Razor claws, Phillips. He wants me dead in here to silence me." Hayes rubbed his chin, deep in thought. "If that's the case, you need more than just strength to get out of here. You need someone watching your back." Marcus looked at Hayes, his gaze sharp but not hostile. "Are you suggesting you want to help me?" Hayes smirked, the first hint of warmth breaking through. "I don't like the way Folsom runs the razor claws, controlling the inmates, with Phillips and the others getting their hands dirty. I used to be a soldier, Jackson, 101st Airborne. I know what it feels like to be turned on by the system. If you're right about Caldwell, I'll help you, but not openly. I can't let Phillips suspect anything." Hayes' sincerity took Marcus by surprise. He had always thought he was alone in this hell, but now a small glimmer of light shone through the darkness. "Thanks, Hayes," he said, his voice low but firm. "I need you to dig deeper into Phillips and the guy in the SUV. If there's evidence, I can use it to get out." Hayes nodded. "I'll give it a shot. But you need to know that I'm not the only one who saw you today. There are people out there keeping an eye on you, and I'm not sure who they are." Hayes' words rang like a warning bell. Marcus tilted his head, signaling him to go on. Hayes lowered his voice to a whisper. "I heard another guard talking about a woman lawyer from Sacramento. She was asking about you, but not through official channels. I don't have a name, but if she's connected to Caldwell, then you're caught between two lines." Marcus clenched his fists, his mind spinning. A lawyer? She could be someone from Caldwell, or maybe someone trying to help him? He wasn't sure, but he knew he needed answers. Hayes gently tapped on the bars, signaling to leave. "I'll let you know if anything changes. Stay alive, Jackson. You're the kind of soldier I respect." As Hayes disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, Marcus sat down on the bed, rubbing his forehead. He thought about his mother, Esther, and her red-rimmed eyes during the prison visit. He recalled the days in the Bay Area when he helped the people stand up against Caldwell. Now, he was not just fighting to survive, he was fighting to regain his honor, and Hayes was the first glimmer of hope he had in this prison. He lay down, closed his eyes, but couldn't sleep. He thought about the mysterious woman from Sacramento. If she was an enemy, he would confront her. If she was an ally, he would take advantage of it. The power of ghosts had exploded, but now he needed more than that. He needed support, and Hayes had just opened the door. Tyrone, Phillips, and Caldwell were still threats, but for the first time, Marcus felt he wasn't completely alone. He took a deep breath, letting the fire in his heart burn steadily. Tomorrow would be a new day, and he would be ready not just to survive, but to fight for the truth that was slowly coming to light. The morning light crept through the small window of cell number 17 at Folsom State Prison, casting faint beams onto the concrete floor. Marcus Ghost Jackson sat on the edge of his bed, gripping the iron frame tightly, his mind still spinning with what Daniel Hayes had said the night before. A female lawyer from Sacramento was inquiring about him. He didn't know who she was, but the name Vincent Caldwell lingered in his thoughts like a ghost that wouldn't fade away. If she was Caldwell's henchwoman, then he was being watched more closely than he realized. But if she was an ally, then she could be the glimmer of hope he needed to escape this hellhole. The alarm clock blared, pulling Marcus out his thoughts. He got up, adjusted his light gray prison uniform, and stepped into the hallway with the other inmates. The atmosphere today was heavy, as if the entire Folsom was waiting for something after yesterday's fight in the yard. He could feel the stares of the prisoners, ranging from curiosity to hostility, but he didn't care. He was used to being hunted, from his days on the battlefield to this prison. What he needed now was answers, and Hayes was the starting point. In the woodworking shop, Marcus was cutting a 2-inch thick board, the sound of the saw humming steadily. He worked with absolute focus, but his ears were tuned to every sound around him. The razor claws hadn't shown up directly. Tyrone Razor, Evans, and Jamal Claw Harris were still in solitary confinement, but he knew they weren't giving up. Hayes was right. Yesterday's fight had only made things worse, and Officer Phillips, with his envelopes of cash, was the link he needed to break to uncover who was really behind it all. During lunch break, Marcus was standing under the shade of an oak tree in the prison yard when Hayes appeared, striding over with a sense of urgency. "Jackson, come with me," he said, his voice low but hurried. Marcus frowned but didn't ask any questions, following Hayes across the yard, past a 12-foot-high barbed wire fence, heading toward the visiting area. "What's going on?" He finally spoke up as they approached the heavy iron door. Hayes glanced at him, his eyes flashing with curiosity. "The woman I mentioned last night, she's here. She wants to see you." Tim Marcus pounded harder, but he kept his expression cold. They entered the visiting area, a long 30-foot room lined with metal tables and a glass partition. Hayes led him to a table in the far corner, where a woman sat, sharp-looking in a black suit. She was about 35, with brown hair pulled back, her bright green eyes shining with determination. Marcus sat down across from her, just an inch away from the thick glass. His gaze locked onto her. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low but cutting. The woman smiled faintly, placing her hand on the table. "I'm Rachel Torres," she said, her voice steady but filled with confidence. "A lawyer from Sacramento. And I'm here to help you, Marcus Jackson." Marcus tilted his head, revealing no emotion. "Help me? Why should I trust you? Vincent Caldwell is also from Sacramento, and he wants me dead." Rachel furrowed her brow, but remained unfazed. "I know about Caldwell, and I know you're not a drug dealer. That conviction is a sham. I've been following your case since it started, and I have reason to believe that Caldwell is behind it all." Marcus clenched his fists under the table, a simmering anger rising within him. "Do you have any proof?" he asked, his gaze sharp as a knife. Rachel nodded slowly. "Not enough to take to court, but I have enough to raise suspicions. I'm working with a group in Sacramento who have been pushed around by Caldwell. They talked about you, how you helped him in the Bay Area, how you sabotaged his project. Caldwell doesn't forgive that, and I think he set you up to silence you." Marcus studied her, weighing his options. "If you're telling the truth, why are you here? I have nothing to offer you." Rachel smiled, this time warmer. "I don't need money, Jackson. I need the truth. If I can prove Caldwell's involved, I can overturn your conviction and take him down for good. But I need you to survive in here to make that happen." Marcus smirked, his eyes still wary. "Surviving is my business. But if you want to help, I need you to find concrete evidence about Caldwell, about Phillips, about anyone he's bribed." Rachel nodded, pulling a small notebook from her bag to jot something down. "I'll dig deeper. I have a source in Sacramento who used to work with Caldwell. But you need to know this. Caldwell isn't just paying off the razor claws. He has his hands in the legal system, cops, lawyers, even judges. Your case is set up way too perfectly to be a coincidence." Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I know, and I'm not going to sit around and wait to die. If you find anything, let me know through Hayes." Rachel looked at him through the glass, her eyes shining with respect. "You're not like anyone I've ever met, Jackson. I've seen people crumble in prison for less than this, but you're still standing strong." Marcus didn't respond, just nodded, He thought about his mother, Esther, and her words, "You are my pride." He remembered the days in the Green Berets when he survived impossible missions. Rachel could be the ally he needed, but he wasn't fully trusting her just yet. The whistle signaling the end of visiting hours rang out, and Rachel stood up. "I'll be back when there's something new," she said, her voice steady. "Stay alive, Jackson. We'll bring Caldwell into the light." She walked away, leaving Marcus with a flicker of hope that was slowly growing. He stood up and stepped out of the visiting area, Hayes walking beside him. "What do you think?" Hayes asked. Marcus shrugged. "If she's telling the truth, I have a chance. If not, I'll still find a way." As Marcus returned to his cell, he sat down on the bed, his gaze fixed on the wall. Hayes and Rachel. Two unexpected allies in the darkness of Folsom. He was no longer alone, but he knew the battle was far from over. Razor Claws, Phillips, and Caldwell remained threats, and he would have to fight every single day to survive, not just for himself, but for the truth. The afternoon sunlight faded over the yard of Folsom State Prison, casting long shadows of a 12-foot barbed wire fence onto the concrete ground. Marcus, Ghost, Jackson stood beneath the shade of an old oak tree, hands shoved in his pockets, his dark brown eyes watching the group of inmates during their free time. The meeting with Rachel Torres that morning still echoed in his mind, a lawyer from Sacramento who claimed she wanted to help him take down Vincent Caldwell. He didn't fully trust her, but the way she spoke about Caldwell, the determination in her voice, sparked a flicker of hope within him. And with Daniel Hayes inside Folsom, he began to realize he wasn't as alone as he once thought. But hope in this prison always comes with danger. Marcus felt the hostile glares from the Razor Claws. Even though Tyrone Razor, Evans, and Jamal Claw Harris were still locked up in solitary confinement, the rumors about his two fights, one in the bathroom and the other in the yard, had spread throughout Folsom, turning him into a name that no one dared underestimate. But he knew that also made him a bigger target. He thought about Rachel's words. Caldwell has a hand in the legal system. If that's true, then Officer Phillips and the Razor Claws were just the tip of a much larger storm brewing. Heavy footsteps echoed behind him, pulling Marcus out his thoughts. He turned to see Daniel Hayes approaching, looking more tense than usual. Hayes stopped about 5 feet away, his green eyes flickering with worry. "Jackson, I need to talk," he said, his voice low but urgent. Marcus frowned, signaling Hayes to go on. "What's up?" he asked, his tone steady. Hayes glanced around, making sure no one was eavesdropping, then lowered his voice. "I just heard from another guard that Phillips is planning something. He knows you met with your lawyer today, and he's not happy." Marcus clenched his fists, a simmering anger rising within him. "Who did he hear from?" he asked, his gaze sharp as a knife. Hayes shrugged, stroking his chin. "Not sure, but I bet someone in the visiting area tipped him off. Phillips is whispering to the rest of the Razor Claws, the guys who haven't been locked up yet. I think they're going to strike again, and this time it won't be easy." Marcus stared at Hayes, his eyes unwavering. "Do you have any proof about Phillips?" Hayes nodded slowly. "I saw him take a thick envelope from the guy in the black SUV last night. I couldn't open it, but I bet it's money and maybe even orders." Hayes's words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. If Phillips was really taking orders from Caldwell's goons, then Rachel was right. This conspiracy was bigger than he thought. He remembered his days in the Green Berets, facing enemies lurking in the shadows, never knowing where they'd come from or when they'd strike. Folsom was nothing more than a renamed battlefield. "Thanks, Hayes," he said, his voice steady. "I need you to keep an eye on Phillips. If he makes a move, I need to know ahead of time." Hayes nodded, giving Marcus a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "I'll do my best, but you need to be careful. I can't be everywhere." As Hayes walked away, Marcus stood alone under the shade of a tree, his gaze fixed on a group of Razor Claws gathered about 30 feet away. They didn't have Tyrone or Jamal with them, but there were at least 10 of them, and their eyes glinted with a ruthless intensity. He knew Hayes was right. They were going to attack, and this time would be a big fight. He didn't have any weapons, but he had Hayes and maybe Rachel behind him. He needed to leverage them to survive the day. The free time passed in tension, and when the whistle signaling the end blew, Marcus headed back to the holding area. But before he could step inside, a small figure blocked his path. Eddie Slim Carter, the scrawny inmate with quick, darting eyes. Slim smirked, whispering urgently, "Jackson, I heard Razor Claws wants to deal with you in the mess hall tonight. They know you met with your lawyer, and they're furious." Marcus frowned, looking at Slim. "Are you sure?" Slim nodded, glancing around. "I'm not joking about this. Watch your back." Slim vanished into the crowd, leaving Marcus with a chilling sense of dread. He stepped into the cell, sat down on the bed, his hands gripping the edge of the metal mattress. The cafeteria was crowded, with few shadows to hide in, but also few guards around at night. A perfect trap if Razor Claws wanted to turn him into a public lesson. He thought about Rachel. She was digging around in Sacramento, searching for evidence on Caldwell. He thought about Hayes. He was keeping an eye on Phillips, trying to protect him from the inside. Two unexpected allies, but he knew he couldn't just rely on them. He needed to face the storm on his own. He stood up, pacing back and forth in the cramped cell that was barely 10 square feet, his muscles tensing as he envisioned the upcoming battle. He recalled the mission in Syria, when he was ambushed in an alley, all alone, armed only with a knife and his will to survive. He had taken down 3 insurgents in the dark, and he would do the same in the cafeteria if it came to that. He thought about his mother, Esther, and her words to the glass. "You are my pride." He couldn't let her down. He couldn't let Caldwell win. When the dinner bell rang, Marcus stepped out of his cell and headed toward the mess hall. He didn't carry any unnecessary weapons, since in the hands of a ghost. The mess hall was 50 feet long, filled with metal tables and the smell of overcooked mashed potatoes, steeped in a tense atmosphere. He grabbed a food tray and sat down at a table near the wall, his eyes scanning the crowd. Razor Claws were there, 10 guys, scattered around, but their gazes were locked onto him. One big guy, with a snake tattoo on his neck, stood up and walked closer, his hand hidden under his shirt. Marcus set the tray down, stood up, his gaze as cold as ice. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice deep but sharp. The guy smirked, pulling out a 6-inch homemade knife. "You're gonna die tonight, Jackson," he growled. Before he could charge, the guard's whistle blew, and Hayes rushed in, baton raised high. "Disperse!" he shouted, his eyes scanning the Razor Claws. The guy with the knife stepped back, but his glare remained fierce. Marcus exhaled, looking at Hayes. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. Hayes nodded. "I told you I'd have your back." As the crowd dispersed, Marcus sat down, his heart racing. Hayes and Rachel, 2 unexpected allies, had just saved him from the storm, but he knew it was only delayed, not over. As darkness closed in around Marcus, his unexpected allies, Hayes and Rachel, reached out to pull him from the storm. Strength lies not only in fists, but also in the hearts that walk alongside him on his journey for justice. Please comment, "You got this, Marcus," in the comments to support him. Let each encouraging word be a small flame lighting Marcus's path, and together we will witness him rise stronger than ever. Thank you. The cafeteria of Folsom State Prison was engulfed in a heavy silence after Daniel Hayes intervened, stopping Razor Claw's attack. Marcus ghost. Jackson sat back down at the metal table, his hands resting on the tray of cold food, his dark brown eyes scanning the scattering inmates. The guy with the snake tattoo on his neck had backed off, but the venomous glare he shot at Marcus was a promise. This isn't over. He exhaled slowly, feeling the adrenaline gradually fade from his body. Hayes had just saved him from another beating, but he knew this was just the calm before the real storm hit. Hayes stood about 10 feet away, gripping his baton tightly, his green eyes scanning the area to make sure the Razor Claws wouldn't come back. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You good, Jackson?" Marcus nodded, shrugging. "Still alive," he replied, his voice hoarse but steady. Hayes smirked, sitting down across from him at the table. "You had me sweating bullets. If I'd been a second late, that guy would have stabbed you." Marcus looked at Hayes, his gaze unwavering. "You showed up just in time. Thanks." Hayes nodded, rubbing his chin, his expression turning serious. "I told you I've got your back. But what just happened wasn't a coincidence. Phillips knows you met with a lawyer, and I bet he had those Razor Claws come after you right in the cafeteria to send a message." Marcus clenched his fists under the table, a simmering anger rising within him. He's scared I'll get out, he said, his voice icy. If Rachel finds evidence on Vincent Caldwell, Phillips and this whole system will come crashing down. Hayes furrowed his brow, leaning forward. Rachel, that lawyer? You trust her? Marcus fell silent for a moment, contemplating. I'm not fully convinced, he finally spoke up. But she knows about Caldwell, about the Bay Area incident. If she's telling the truth, I have a shot. If not, I'll still find my own way. Hayes nodded slowly, his eyes lighting up with respect. You're the kind of soldier who doesn't give up? Huh? I've seen guys like you in Kandahar who never back down, even when everything's against them. Marcus smirked. 12 years in the Green Berets taught me that. Hayes stood up and lightly tapped the table. I'll keep an eye on Phillips and the Razor Claws. If your lawyer comes back, I'll let you know. But tonight, stay in your cell and don't give them a chance. Marcus nodded, watching Hayes walk away. He sat alone, chewing on a cold potato chip, his mind spinning with the pieces of the puzzle. Rachel Torres was digging around in Sacramento, searching for evidence on Caldwell. Hayes was monitoring Phillips from inside Folsom. Two unexpected allies, a guard and a lawyer, had transformed him from a lone wolf into someone with support. But he knew he couldn't just rely on them. He was Ghost, and a ghost always fought for himself. As the dinner bell rang, signaling the end of mealtime, Marcus returned to cell number 17, his step steady but his heart heavy. He sat down on the bed, rubbing his neck, where Jamal's handprint still left a lingering ache from their fight yesterday. He thought about his mother, Esther, and her red-rimmed eyes behind the glass. He reminisced about the days in the Bay Area, when he helped the people stand up against Caldwell, never imagining it would lead him here. Rachel said she would bring Caldwell to light, but he knew the price of justice was steep. It demanded blood, sweat, and an unyielding spirit. He laid down, closed his eyes, and let his mind settle. He remembered the mission in Mosul when he got separated from his team, facing 3 ISIS gunmen in a crumbling building. He survived on instinct and alertness, and now he needed them more than ever. Hayes and Rachel were allies, but Razor Claws, Phillips, and Caldwell were still lurking threats. He wasn't afraid. He was used to being hunted, but he knew he had to keep a cool head to get through this. The siren's wail faded, and Folsom was swallowed by darkness. Marcus lay there, not asleep, but deep in thought. The power of Ghost had surged, but now he had the light from Hayes and Rachel. He was no longer alone, and no matter how fierce the storm ahead might be, he would face it not just to survive, but to reclaim the honor that had been stolen from him. The day Marcus Ghost Jackson stepped out of Folsom State Prison, the brilliant California sunshine poured down like a warm welcome after months spent in the shadows. He stood before the heavy 15-foot iron gate, gripping his personal belongings, a worn watch, an empty wallet, and a Green Beret dog tag he hadn't seen since the day he was arrested. He took a deep breath, feeling the air of freedom fill his lungs, but inside, there was no sense of relief. The fight in prison was over, but the real battle, the battle with Vincent Caldwell, was just beginning. Rachel Torres kept her promise. After weeks of digging in Sacramento, she found the documentary evidence, recordings, and testimony from a witness who once worked for Caldwell, enough to overturn his false conviction. Daniel Hayes also played a crucial role, providing information about Officer Phillips and the shady dealings in Folsom, helping Rachel build her case. Just yesterday, the judge declared Marcus innocent, and now he stands here, no longer prisoner number 47291, but a free man with a burning desire for revenge in his heart. Rachel stood about 10 feet away from him, next to her black sedan, her bright green eyes shining with satisfaction. "Congratulations, Jackson," she said, her tone steady yet warm. "You're out now. It's time for us to deal with Caldwell." Marcus nodded, his gaze sharp. "Thanks, Rachel. But I'm not stopping at just getting out of here. He has to pay for what he did to me, for everyone he hurt." Rachel gave a faint smile as she opened the car door. "I know. Get in. We have work to do." On the way from Folsom to Sacramento, a long 25-mile drive, Rachel recounted what she had discovered. "Caldwell didn't just set you up," she said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "He's running a corrupt real estate network, bribing people, even hiring gangs to clear the way. The project in the Bay Area that you messed up is just a part of it. He lost $10 million because of you, and he's not going to forgive that. Marcus looked out the window, the fields and highway blurring by like a faded film. He thinks throwing me in jail will solve everything, he said, his voice low. He's dead wrong. Rachel nodded, glancing at him through the rear-view mirror. I have the address of an office building in downtown San Francisco where Caldwell is meeting with his big partners. He'll be there tonight, and I plan to get you in, but you need to know he has security that's not just a bunch of thugs like Razor Claws, but professional mercenaries. Marcus smirked, his eyes flashing with determination. I face worse in Syria. Take me there, Rachel. I'll handle the rest. They stopped at a small apartment in Sacramento, where Rachel had arranged for him to stay temporarily. Marcus walked in, setting his bag down on an old wooden table, his gaze sweeping over the simple room, a worn-out sofa, a small table, and a window overlooking the bustling street. Rachel sat down across from him, pulling out a stack of documents from her briefcase. This is the building layout, she said, spreading the blueprints out on the table. It's 20 stories high, and Caldwell's office is on the top floor. The main entrance has security, but there's a service door on the east side that's less noticed. I'll take you close to that, but from there, you'll have to figure out on your own. Marcus nodded, studying the blueprint with the kind of focus he'd had at Fort Bragg when planning a raid. He pointed to a spot on the map, the fire escape. If I can get in here, I can make it to the upper floor without being seen by the cameras. Rachel frowned, worry etched clearly in her eyes. Are you sure? If you get caught, I can't protect you again. Marcus looked at her, his gaze unwavering. I don't need protection, Rachel. I need justice. He thought about the days in Folsom, the fights with the Razor Claws, the sleepless nights waiting for the blade to come out of the darkness. He thought about his mother, Esther, and her red-rimmed eyes when he was sentenced. Caldwell had stolen his honor, turning him into just a number in prison, and now he was going to make that bastard pay. Rachel stood up, placing her hand on his shoulder. I believe in you, Jackson. But be careful, Caldwell is not the kind of guy you can take lightly. As the sun sets, Marcus gets ready. He puts on a simple black outfit that Rachel gave him, hiding a 4-inch folding knife in his pocket. Not the ideal weapon, but enough for him to get the job done. He looks at himself in the mirror, seeing a different man, no longer a prisoner, but the warrior ghost he once was, ready to face his greatest enemy. Rachel stands in the doorway, her expression worried yet resolute. Are you ready? She asks. Marcus nods, his voice low. Let's go. The trip from Sacramento to San Francisco took nearly 50 miles. And when they arrived, the city was bathed in bright neon lights. The Caldwell office building loomed before them, a 20-story structure with gleaming glass that reflected the light like an impenetrable fortress. Rachel parked the car a block away, pointing toward the service entrance on the east side. That's your way in, she said, her voice low but firm. I'll wait here. If anything goes wrong, run out and I'll take you away. Marcus nodded, his gaze sharp, then stepped out of the car, his silhouette blending into the quiet night. He approached the service door, his heart pounding steadily but fiercely. He wasn't afraid. He was used to impossible missions. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a battle to reclaim what had been stolen. He pushed the door open, stepped inside, and the ultimate showdown with Vincent Caldwell officially began. The east service door of the office building in San Francisco clicked shut behind Marcus Ghost Jackson, cutting him off from the outside world with a sharp snap. Inside, the cold air from the air conditioning mingled with the scent of new carpet and metal, creating a chilling silence. Marcus stood in the narrow hallway, about 20 feet long, the flickering fluorescent lights overhead casting his shadow like a ghost ready to step into the lair of his enemy. He gripped the 4-inch folding knife tightly in his pocket, his dark brown eyes scanning every hidden corner. This wasn't Folsom State Prison, but the feeling of being hunted was just as real. He moved quickly but quietly, the fabric shoes brushing lightly against the floor as he headed toward the emergency stairs Rachel Torres had pointed out on the map. The building stood 20 stories tall, and Vincent Caldwell was on the top floor of the 20th, where he was meeting with partners to solidify his corrupt empire. Marcus knew the guy had professional mercenary guards, Not the thugs like Razor Claws, but he wasn't afraid. He had infiltrated strongholds in Syria, facing enemies twice his number without teammates. This was just another battlefield. And he was Ghost, the phantom who never faltered. The fire escape stairway is at the end of the hallway, a gray metal door with a faint word exit. Marcus pushes the door open and steps inside, feeling the cool rush of air from the towering staircase. He starts to climb, each step steady, counting the floors in his head. Floor 5, floor 10. Floor 15, his muscles tighten, his breath steady but strong. He doesn't stop, doesn't rest. Just like those days running 15 miles at Fort Bragg with a heavy 60-pound backpack. When he reaches the 20th floor, he pauses in front of the door leading to the main hallway, pressing his ear against the cold metal to listen. Heavy footsteps echoed from the other side. 2 guards, probably on patrol. Marcus waited, gripping his knife tightly, his heart pounding steadily like a machine. As the footsteps faded away, he pushed the door open and stepped into the luxurious hallway on the 20th floor. The thick red carpet, the glass walls overlooking the sparkling lights of San Francisco, and the neatly hung abstract paintings all radiated the wealth that Caldwell had built on the bones and blood of others. Marcus moved toward the end of the hallway, where the double doors led into the main office of the man. At the entrance, 2 tall security guards stood watch, dressed in black suits, their hands hiding guns under their jackets. Marcus didn't hesitate. He charged out of the shadows, quick as lightning, delivering a powerful punch to the jaw of the guard on the left before he could react. The guy went down, unconscious, his head hitting the wall with a thud. The guard on the right pulled out his gun, but Marcus grabbed his wrist, twisting it back until the weapon clattered to the carpet. Then he delivered a kick to the knee. The guard crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain, and Marcus finished him off with a punch to the temple, leaving him motionless. He picked up a Glock 19, a compact handgun, checked the magazine, and tucked it into the back of his pants. He wasn't a fan of guns in close quarters, but it was an advantage if things got out of hand. He pushed open the double doors and stepped into the main office, a spacious 50-square-foot room with a large mahogany desk, leather chairs, and a glass window overlooking the entire city. Vincent Caldwell sat there, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, dressed in an expensive gray suit, talking on the phone. 2 security guards stood near the desk, but they didn't have time to react as Marcus charged in. He punched the first guy in the face, hearing the sickening crack of his nose breaking, then spun around and slammed him down onto the floor. The second guy pulled out a gun, but Marcus threw a folding knife into his hand, making the gun drop 5 feet away. He charged forward, kicking hard into the guy's chest, sending him crashing backward over the table, his head smashing into the glass with a loud crack. Caldwell shot up, eyes wide, his phone slipping from his grasp. "Who the hell are you?" he shouted, his voice trembling but trying to maintain an air of authority. Marcus stepped forward, his gaze as cold as ice, gripping the Glock tightly. "Vincent Caldwell," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You know who I am. Marcus Jackson, the guy you sent to Folsom to silence." Caldwell backed away, his back hitting the glass window, his face going pale. You don't have any proof," he growled, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his panic. Marcus smirked, pulling out a small recording device from his pocket, a gift from Rachel before he left Sacramento. "You're wrong," he said, pressing the record button. "Go ahead, Caldwell. Admit you set me up, hired Razor Claws to kill me. I want to hear it from your own mouth." Caldwell scoffed, trying to regain his composure. "You think I'm stupid? I'm not saying a word, Jackson. You won't get away with this." Marcus stepped closer, just 3 feet away, his Glock raised to Caldwell's chest. "You think I won't do it?" he asked, his voice icy. "I've killed guys like you in Mosul. Syria, those who thought they were untouchable. You're no different from them. Speak up or I pull the trigger." Sweat streamed down Caldwell's forehead, his eyes darting around. All right, he shouted, raising his hands high. "I did it. I planted drugs in your car, paid off the cops, the lawyer, and the judge to throw you in prison. I hired Razor Claws to take you out in their all because you cost me $10 million in the Bay Area." Marcus held the gun steady, his gaze locked on him. "Go on," he said. "Who helped you in Folsom?" Caldwell swallowed hard, his voice trembling. Phillips, Officer Phillips. I paid him 50 grand to clear the way for Razor Claws. He's my inside man. Marcus nodded, turned off the recording device, and stuffed it into his pocket. Thanks, he said, his tone low. You just sealed your own fate. Caldwell lunged forward, trying to grab the gun, but Marcus landed a solid punch to his gut, causing him to double over, clutching his stomach and groaning. The alarm siren blared from a distance. The guard had spotted them. Marcus glanced at Caldwell one last time, his eyes shining with triumph. He had the evidence. Now it was time to escape. He dashed toward the stairs, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The alarm siren blared deafeningly in the 20-story office building in San Francisco, echoing down the 20th floor hallway as Marcus Ghost Jackson sprinted toward the emergency stairs. He had just forced Vincent Caldwell to confess the crime of setting him up, hiring Razor Claws, and bribing Officer Phillips, all captured on the tiny device he had hidden in his pocket. But the victory wasn't complete. He could hear the pounding footsteps in the distance. Caldwell security, armed mercenaries, were closing in to cut him off. Marcus didn't look back at the real estate mogul crumpled on the office floor. He had what he needed, and now it was time to get out. He pushed open the stairwell door and raced down the metal steps like a ghost, fast and silent, never stopping. 18th floor, 15th floor, 10th floor. His feet moved steadily, just like those days running 15 miles at Fort Bragg under the blazing 95-degree sun. The Glock 19 he had taken from the guard was still snug in his waistband, but he didn't want to use it unless absolutely necessary. This wasn't a battlefield in Syria, where he had taken out enemies without a second thought. This was a fight for honor, and he wanted to survive to see Caldwell pay for his crimes in court. As he reached the 5th floor, the guard's shout echoed from above. He's on the stairs. Block him down there. Marcus leaned over the railing, peering down at 3 guys in black suits, handguns in hand, rushing up from the 1st floor. He didn't hesitate. He jumped over the railing, landing on a lower step 6 feet down, and kept running. The gunfire erupted. A bullet hit in the wall, just inches away from him, concrete shards flying. He ducked low, sprinting to the door on the 3rd floor, stepping into a hallway lined with empty desks. He sprinted down the 30-foot-long hallway, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The footsteps of the guards were getting closer, but Marcus didn't panic. He recalled his mission in Mosul, when he was chased through the dusty alleys, surviving on instinct and alertness. He dashed toward the window at the end of the hallway, kicked hard at the 1-inch thick glass, shattering it, with shards falling into the alley 20 feet below. He jumped out, landing on a large trash bin, rolling to absorb the impact, then sprang to his feet and ran toward Rachel Torres' black sedan waiting a block away. Rachel opened the car door as she saw him rushing over, her green eyes wide with worry. "Get in," she shouted. Marcus jumped into the passenger seat, panting, and Rachel hit the gas before the security team could show up in the alley. The car sped to the streets of San Francisco, the city lights blurring past like a faint ribbon of glow. "Do you have it?" Rachel asked, her voice urgent. Marcus pulled the recording device from his bag, holding it up with the red light still blinking. "Yeah," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. He confessed everything about the setup, Razor Claws, Phillips, all of it. Rachel exhaled, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Oh my God, Jackson, you did it." Marcus smirked, his gaze still sharp as a knife. "Not yet. He's going to prison. There's no way he's getting out of this one." Rachel nodded, glancing at him through the rear-view mirror. "I'll take this to a judge I trust. With Phillips' evidence from Hayes and this, Caldwell doesn't stand a chance." Marcus leaned back in his seat, his hand rubbing his neck, where Jamal's fingerprints from Folsom still left a lingering sensation. He was out of prison. He had faced a mastermind, and now he had justice in his hands. They drove to Sacramento, a long 50-mile trip in silence. Marcus stared out the window, thinking about his mother, Esther, and her red-rimmed eyes when he was sentenced. He thought about the people in the Bay Area, the ones he helped fight against Caldwell, never realizing it would lead him here. Rachel broke the silence as they entered the city. "What are you going to do next, Jackson, once everything is settled?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, then replied, I don't know. Maybe help people like me, those who've been turned away by the system. But first, I need to see Caldwell pay. A few days later, Marcus stood in the courtroom in Sacramento, wearing the simple suit Rachel had given him, his hand tightly gripping the green beret's dog tag in his pocket. Vincent Caldwell sat at the defendant's table, his salt and pepper hair disheveled, a bitter glare directed at him across the 40-foot-long room. Rachel stood beside the prosecutor, presenting the evidence. The recording device, documents from Folsom, and the testimony of a witness who had once worked for Caldwell. Caldwell's chilling confession echoed to the speakers, cold and clear. I planted drugs in your car. I hired Razor Claws to kill you. The jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty, the foreman declared, his voice echoing throughout the room. Caldwell slammed his hand on the table, shouting something no one could quite make out, but Marcus didn't care. He watched the handcuffed man being led away, and for the first time in months, he felt a sense of relief. Rachel stepped closer, placing her hand on his shoulder. You did it, Jackson, she said, her voice warm. He won't hurt anyone anymore. Marcus nodded, his gaze softening. Thank you, Rachel. And Hayes, too. I couldn't have done it without you, too. She smiled. You're the one who never gives up. We're just here to help you stay strong. As he stepped out of the courtroom, the Sacramento sun bathed him in warmth and brilliance. He thought of his mother Esther would cry when she heard the news, but this time it would be tears of joy. He thought about Folsom, about the night spent fighting to survive. Justice had been served, and Ghost had triumphed. He stood there, taking a deep breath, letting the light chase away the darkness within. The confrontation was over, but his journey had only just begun. The gentle afternoon sunlight streamed to the large window of the small apartment in Sacramento, casting a warm glow on the rugged face of Marcus Ghost Jackson. He sat on the worn-out sofa, cradling a cup of cold coffee, his dark brown eyes gazing out at the bustling street just 10 feet away through the glass. A week had passed since Vincent Caldwell was sentenced. The real estate mogul now sat behind bars, his empire of corruption crumbling to ashes in the wind. Rachel Torres and Daniel Hayes had helped him reclaim justice, and Marcus Jackson's name was no longer just a number in prison. It had become a symbol of resilience against both Folsom State Prison and the system that had turned its back on him. But the victory didn't bring complete joy he had once imagined. He set his coffee cup down on the small wooden table, his hand instinctively gripping the green beret's dog tag in his pocket, the only remnant left from his life before everything fell apart. He thought about the days in Folsom, the battles with the Razor Claws, the sleepless nights waiting for Blade from the shadows, and the cold gaze of Warden Phillips as he accepted dirty money from Caldwell's goons. He had survived, he had won, but the scars both on his body and in his soul remained, like deep cuts that would never fully heal. The apartment door creaked open, and Rachel stepped inside, holding a thick stack of documents. She was dressed in a sharp black suit, her bright green eyes shining with a familiar determination. Jackson, she said, her voice warm yet tinged with a hint of anxiety. I have news for you. Marcus turned around, his expression unchanged. What news? He asked, his tone steady and deep. Rachel sat down across from him, placing the stack of documents on the table. Caldwell was sentenced to 25 years without the possibility of parole. Phillips also got caught. He spilled everything about Caldwell's network in Folsom, and the Razor Claws, Tyrone and Jamal, have been transferred to another prison, far away from you for good. Marcus nodded slowly, his hand rubbing the spot on his neck, where Jamal's grip from the fight outside still left a faint sensation. Good, he said, his tone cold but firm. They deserve to pay. Rachel smiled faintly, but her gaze softened. Not just them. You've done what few dare to dream, overthrowing a guy like Caldwell, bringing justice back to those he oppressed. I just met some folks from the Bay Area who want to thank you. They're calling you a hero. Marcus shrugged, his gaze drifting to the window. I'm not a hero, Rachel. I just want to survive, to get back what was taken from me. Rachel leaned forward, resting her hands on the table. You've done more than that. You've given hope to those who think the system will always win. But I know you're not okay, right? I can see it in your eyes, the way you look at everything as if you're still fighting. Her words cut through Marcus's tough exterior like a knife. He fell silent for a moment, gripping the dog tag in his pocket, so tightly that his fingers turned white. "I don't know how to do anything else," he finally spoke, his voice hoarse. 12 years in the Green Berets, then Folsom, I only know how to fight. Now that it's all over, I don't even know who I am anymore. Rachel looked at him, her gaze softening. "You don't have to know right now. You just escaped. Hell, give yourself some time." Marcus thought about his mother, Esther. He had called her right after the trial, hearing her cry on the phone not tears of sorrow, but tears of joy. "You make me so proud, Marcus," she said, her voice trembling. He promised to visit her in Oakland, but he wasn't ready yet. He needed time to find himself again, not the ghost of the battlefield, not prison number 47291, but Marcus Jackson, the man who once had a life before everything fell apart. Rachel stood up, took a piece of paper from the folder, and slid it across to him. "This is an invitation," she said, "from an organization in Sacramento that helps wrongfully convicted people reintegrate into society. They've heard about you, and they want you to participate, not to fight, but to guide and share. I think you'd be great at this." Marcus looked at the paper, his eyes scanning the bold print. Second chance justice and rebirth. He frowned and looked up at Rachel. "You think I can do it?" Rachel nodded, her eyes shining with belief. "I know you can do it. You understand how that system breaks people, how it leaves them behind. You survived Folsom, took down Caldwell. Who better than you to help others get back on their feet?" Marcus took the paper, his hand trembling slightly, not out of fear, but from a strange feeling. Hope. He thought about the guys in Folsom, not Tyrone or Jamal, but people like him, cast aside by the system, forgotten. Maybe he could do something for them. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice deep but no longer as cold as before. Rachel smiled and stood up. "Good. I'll give you some space for a while. But if you need anything, just call me. You're not alone anymore, Jackson." She walked away, leaving Marcus with the paper and a jumble of thoughts. He got up, stepped out onto the small balcony, and looked down at the streets of Sacramento 20 feet below. A cool breeze swept through, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the lively sounds of traffic. He thinks about the days in Syria, when he lay in the shelter, waiting for the bombs to drop, unsure if he would survive the night. He thinks about Folsom, the battles fought to stay alive, the nights listening to Razor Claw's hoarse laughter. He survived it all, not just because of strength, but because of a will that never faltered. Now, the fighting is over, but he feels a new fire smoldering within him, not for revenge, but to rebuild. He gripped the railing tightly, taking a deep breath. Justice had prevailed, but this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a chance to rediscover himself, to help others rise from the ashes, just as he had done. Ghost was once a shadow of the battlefield in prison, but now Marcus Jackson would be the light for a new tomorrow. The cool afternoon breeze swept through the small balcony of the apartment in Sacramento, tousling the short hair of Marcus Ghost Jackson as he stood there, gripping the railing tightly, his dark brown eyes gazing down at the street 20 feet below. The paper from Rachel Torres, an invitation from the Second Chance organization, lay on the table behind him, a reminder that his life was about more than just taking down Vincent Caldwell. Justice had prevailed, but he knew he needed more than that. He needed to not just survive, but to live a life that mattered. For the first time in many years, he felt a new fire igniting within him, not to fight, but to build. The doorbell rang, pulling Marcus out his thoughts. He stepped inside, opened the door, and standing before him was his mother, Mrs. Esther Jackson. She was small, with wispy gray hair and brown eyes like his, now red and puffy from emotion. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling, then rushed forward to hug him tightly. He stood still for a moment, feeling her warm embrace, then wrapped his arms around her, holding on as if he never wanted to let go. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm home." She stepped back, wiped her tears, and smiled. "You make me so proud. When I heard that bastard was locked up, I just wanted to run right over here." Marcus led her inside and invited her to sit down on the sofa. He poured a glass of water from the pitcher on the table, handed it to her, and then sat across from her. "I'm sorry for making you worry," he said, his gaze softening. "But I have to do this for you, for myself." Esther took his hand, her grip trembling slightly but warm. I know. I've always known you're a warrior. But now you're free, Marcus. What do you plan to do next? He looked at her, thinking about Rachel's question about the invitation on the table. I'm not sure, he replied, but I want to help others like me, those who've been left behind by the system. Esther nodded, her eyes shining with belief. You have a big heart, Marcus. No matter what you've been through war, prison you've never let it harden you. I believe you'll find your way. Her words were like a warm breeze sweeping through his heart, dispelling the last remnants of doubt. He stood up, grabbed the paper from the table, and handed it to her. An organization here wants you to help those who have been wrongfully convicted. I'm thinking about accepting. She skimmed through it, smiling. Sounds like something meant for you. You've always stood up for others, ever since you were a kid in Oakland. The conversation with his mother stretched into the evening, and as she left with a promise to return soon, Marcus felt a weight lift from his heart. He sat back on the sofa, clutching the piece of paper, reading each line. Second Chance wasn't just a job. It was a mission, a way for him to turn the scars from Folsom into strength for others. He thought about the guys in prison, not Tyrone, Razor, Evans, or Jamal Claw Harris, but those who were crushed by the system, with no one to stand up for them. He had once been one of them, and now he could be the one to change that. The next morning, Marcus walked into the Second Chance office, a 2-story building located 5 miles from downtown Sacramento. Rachel had arranged a meeting, and as he stepped through the glass door, a middle-aged woman with her blonde hair pulled back approached him with a warm smile. Marcus Jackson? She asked, her voice friendly. I'm Linda Hayes, and I'm not related to Daniel Hayes. Just so you know, she chuckled, shaking his hand. Marcus nodded, a slight smirk on his face. Nice to meet you. Rachel mentioned you wanted to see me. Linda led him into a small conference room, about 15 feet long, with a wooden table and a few folding chairs. We've heard about you, how you escaped from Folsom and took down Vincent Caldwell. You're exactly the kind of person we need. We help the wrongfully convicted find lawyers, support their reintegration, and sometimes we just listen to them. You've been inside. You understand them better than anyone. Marcus sat down, his gaze sweeping across the room. I'm not great at talking, he said, his voice low, but I know what it feels like to be abandoned. If I can help, I will. Linda smiled, pushing a stack of documents toward him. This is the first case, if you agree, a guy in San Quentin, wrongfully convicted of drug trafficking, just like you. We need someone to talk to him, to give him hope. Marcus looked at the stack of documents, his fingers gliding over the first page. He saw the guy's name, James Carter, along with photo, a black man, around 40, with vacant eyes. He recalled his own time in Folsom, those desperate days that felt like there was no way out. All right, he said, his voice steady. I'll do it. As Marcus left the office, he felt a surge of new energy coursing through his body. He was no longer the ghost of the battlefield or the prison. He was Marcus Jackson, a man who had found purpose after the ashes. That night, he drove back to Oakland for the first time in months to visit Grandma Esther. When he stepped into the small house where he had grown up, just 10 feet off the main road, she hugged him tightly once more, tears streaming down her face. You found your way back, haven't you? She asked. Marcus nodded, smiling the first real smile he had worn in a long time. Yes, Mom, I found it. He stood in the backyard, gazing up at the twinkling night sky. He thought about Folsom, about the battles fought for survival. He thought about Caldwell, now locked up in prison, and the people in the Bay Area who could finally live in peace. Justice had prevailed, but what he found was even greater than a new beginning, not just for him, but for others as well. He clenched the Green Berets dog tag tightly, feeling its strength in his hand. Ghost had completed the mission, and now Marcus Jackson would move forward, bringing light to places that had once known only darkness. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey with Marcus in today's video on the Legendary Narratives channel. From the darkness of Folsom to the light of justice, he has shown that nothing can conquer a resilient heart. If you feel moved by that strength, please hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next inspiring stories. Marcus didn't just defeat Vincent Caldwell. he found himself again, bringing hope to those who have been forgotten. We are proud to share this story with you, our amazing audience at Legendary Narratives. Goodbye for now, and thank you for being here as we spread the spirit of resilience together. We'll see you in the next video. Stay tough, stay proud, and see you soon.